Hey everybody, we're off ready to start now, and as I said in the description, we have Teal Summers, also known as Eve, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her background between faith and anti-faith, I guess you could call it, and we'll just let the conversation go where it goes, and we might be joined later by another almost former atheist. I guess I could put it that way, but we'll see how it goes. How you doing, Eve?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. So, take it away, I guess.
Okay, well, I guess I'll just kind of start out with what put me on the journey to atheism, and that would be there's several factors. Of course, I grew up in a devout Christian home where my parents were very devout Christians, still are, and they love the Lord and everything. And they raised me where they pretty much we were raised in the country. We didn't have cable, we didn't have internet. And so a lot of worldly things were filtered from my life, and my parents, did the best they could to kind of protect me from worldly matters and things. And I think that this is both a benefit and also not so much so, because once you get out into the world and you actually start picking up new information that your parents kind of shielded from you, it starts to really get your wheels turning. And, I had started to consider, and especially when I had an incident with my autistic son coming back from his father and had been abused by his father. He had belt marks all over him. I had to call CPS and go through all that. And that was kind of the starting point of me not understanding suffering in the world, and not understanding some of the things within the Old Testament as well. And so I, wanted to go on a journey of where I would find answers to my questions and doubts, because, all throughout my Christian walk, I was kind of scared to do that. I was fearful of actually following through with that. So I prayed, and I prayed that the Lord would bring me back around to him if he was true. And, because a big part of me was like, what if I was indoctrinated by my parents? What if my parents are brainwashed? What if they brainwashed me? And I knew that I could, I had experiences of feeling the Lord's presence when I prayed, and really feeling like he was there and that I had a relationship with God. But you hear certain things from atheists that start to make you question those things. Like, you hear them say things like, well, if your mind is tricked to believe a certain thing, your mind could produce certain reactions and experiences, right? So here I am thinking, am I doing that? Am I the one producing this relationship and experience that I feel in God's presence? And so all of these questions, things about suffering and everything were popping up into my heart, and I didn't know how to go about it. And so I prayed to the Lord and asked him, if he really was true, that he, guide me along this journey, and that he brings me back around to him. And of course, I started looking into debates and arguments between atheist and theist, and that swayed me a great deal. And I ended up being an atheist for 4 years. And, when I had become an atheist, I thought, well, that's it. God didn't bring me back around to him. He wasn't at the end of the rainbow, so to speak. So I thought that I had gotten my answers, and came to my conclusion that he didn't even exist. And I was actually an anti-theist for most of those 4 years. Had thought that I had been brainwashed in my upbringing, and that it was dangerous because it wasn't reality, and all these things. And so I was an anti-theist, not just an atheist, for most of those 4 years as an atheist. Do you want me to go into how I came back around?
Well, sure, just keep going.
Okay. Well, I had started, right around the presidential debate, there was all these issues between the left and the right politically and everything. And at this point, I was a very liberal atheist, and there was several things that I had learned actually throughout my atheist walk that I needed to learn, like the whole suffering thing. When I had to confront a guy named Forbidden Fruit that was promoting this idea of let's try to rid the world of mental illnesses, I started to think about this for a second, and it's not that God produces mental illnesses or diseases or anything, but I was thinking about my own situation with my autistic son, and I was like, well, I know one thing's for certain. I had went through an abusive relationship with his father, and if it wasn't for my son, and Zachary's an autistic kid that he actually requires and demands for me to give him affection, which a lot of autistic kids ain't like that. So I'm kind of blessed in that area. And with me coming out of the abusive relationship with his father, I know that if it was not for him demanding that affection, that I would have bottled up, and that my children probably would have ended up seeing me as a cold-hearted mother. Not that I would have been abusive or anything like that, but the affection wouldn't have been there, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And so I knew that Zachary's condition actually produced compassion and patience in me, and also affection. And so when I heard Forbidden Fruit advocating almost eugenics, is what he was kind of leaning toward and advocating, and I thought, well, what would the world be? Where would humanity be if all of the mental illnesses were eradicated?
Right.
And I thought that might not be such a good idea for humanity, because the mentally ill do produce compassion and patience and things. So I actually kind of figured out suffering. It can be used in this fallen state as a good thing. God uses it in a way that produces something good from it. So I don't know. I get sidetracked into all this information, but I had come across that, and then I had also learned that the liberals had control over most of our information, our education, our media, the television, things like that. And I knew that as an atheist and as a liberal atheist. And I thought, as soon as I realized that, I thought, okay, I need to be a little bit more skeptical of my own political position, because the liberals seem to have all the control over all the information.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to look into things, and I was taking an anthropology class, and this anthropology class really started to get my wheels turning in regards to, was I right on the right side politically in my liberal stance? And with the whole presidential debate going on, I started considering, well, if we open the floodgates and just let Islam in, that's kind of a Trojan horse there. And I just started seeing all this stuff that got me to actually change my political position. And also I started to realize the importance of Christianity as far as culture. I was not convinced of Christianity at this point. But I started to recognize the importance that Christianity had on moral standards in culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so I became a cultural Christian at that point and started defending Christianity against Islam and things like that. And it was really weird, because I was like, what is going on? Because every time I would defend Christianity against Islam, the atheist would defend Islam.
Isn't that crazy?
And yes, I was like, what? what is going on here? Um, so anyways, at that point, I decided to look into all my positions, and I got off the internet. I shut down my channels and all that, and I started to look into philosophical arguments again. And um, I was swayed. I was swayed that there had to be a creator, that atheism, believing in something coming from nothing, and even in this, even in current science, which I believe is false, regarding cosmology, and the spherical model and everything like that. Even current science, um, William Lane Craig uses current science, but he still makes a better case than the atheist he debates,
Right.
if that makes any sense.
Right.
Because, yeah, because in my opinion, they can't fully hide God, even if they're trying to with this false model of creation. They cannot fully hide him. You still see order, you still see pattern, you still see cycles, and this is why they have to come up with things like the multiverse. They have to come up with big, huge numbers, and just to make their ideas work. Because the only reason why multiverse is a thing with atheists is because they know that a universe like this one coming by chance would have to require millions of chances
Right.
for it to even be probable. So they come up with this multiverse. So I started noticing all that and ended up at a deist position. And then when I came across flat Earth and researched that, I was convinced of that. And as soon as I was convinced of that, verses just started coming to memory. And I just broke down and started crying and thanked God at that time for showing me the truth. Because this whole time, this whole journey of mine I was seeking truth. I wanted truth. Even though I was misled for the 4 years I was an atheist, I wanted what was true. So that's pretty much the gist of it in a nutshell.
Awesome. Yeah, I think what anybody would hear you at the first level is, when they hear you talking all these things, is to say that you were what you just said at the last, a truth seeker, and you weren't just interested in finding some story that you liked that you could run with. You were wanting to know what was objectively true that may or may not match with what you wanted to find out.
Yes. I was at the point where I wanted truth regardless if I didn't like it or not.
Right. Right. And that's another thing, is that a lot of times people will start out that way, and then they'll get to the certain spot they feel comfortable and stop the truth seeking. I found the truth, I'm not going to look at it anymore, and they get stagnant there. And I think that happens to Christians, it happens to flat earthers, it happens to just about anybody in any situation, where they'll forget to keep cross-examining everything they believe.
And even atheists, yeah. They'll come to a point of atheism and think that that's it, just like I did for a while, until something politically sparked that wheels turning again,
Right. Yeah. It's one of my favorite Bible verses is Proverbs 18:17, that says the first to speak always seems right until they're cross-examined. And people won't, I've tried to say, it's like in a court of law, if you were on the witness stand being accused of something, and the prosecution said something, the defense said something, and then the judge made a decision, that nobody would accept that. But we do that all the time with our truth seeking. We'll hear one side, hear the other, and usually it's the side we grew up with we tend to reject if it isn't confirmed over and over by society. And then we hear the other view and go, this is the truth, I hated that other stuff, I'm stopping here. And they never examine it again. They lose their healthy skepticism.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I agree.
I wanted to, before I forget, to ask you things about what are good and bad ways that Christians in general, at least those who engage in debates of any sort, to use, and that things that work, things that don't work. I know I've showed you my little quick reference that I have had on my website. I could share that if you want, and then I don't know what do you think about that as far as anything
Yeah,
you've encountered?
yeah, I thought that your reference was on point and is good, because these are a lot of issues that the atheists bring up. I didn't get to read all of it. I read, I think, about the first three or four claims
Oh,
on
okay.
there. But it definitely, yeah, you could bring that up because it's definitely pertains to what atheists bring up and think and stuff.
I got that up here. Hopefully, that's sharing. I'll post the link in the chat there if anybody wants to go look at it. Yeah, this is just my own experience. Okay, so it's going to be limited. There may be other angles or questions that other people encountered, but I try to summarize things all the time and boil them down to their lowest common denominator, and that's just my effort at doing that. Logical arguments, philosophical arguments, hypocrisy, even on the atheist side, that defining terms, all sorts of things that have to be considered. And I don't know do you think that as an atheist, an anti-theist specifically at the time, whether these things would have been convincing or at least made you pause?
Yeah, some of those things did, like, let me look there and see. Um, of course, the belief in God is no different from the belief in unicorns or Santa Claus. That was a major thing for me. I categorized religion as mythology.
Okay.
And I think that this has to do a lot with the science realm and what is put in front of us as reality from the elite and from the information that we do get and from science. Um, it makes it out as, I mean, it's a false reality. So the false reality that's given to us is convincing people that the miraculous things that have taken place in biblical times is impossible because we just don't see those types of things occurring in this day and age. And so people start to think, well, maybe it is impossible, or maybe it meant something metaphoric, or meant this or meant that, and start to really question their faith just because they don't. They're blinded by the false reality presented, and they don't see these things occurring. So.
Right. Yeah. Are you familiar with that flying spaghetti monster? Where they call themselves pastafarians. It's really very witty, but they're making this argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
I think I know on the surface they are having just a lot of fun with it, but it still comes from a standard atheist belief that anything supernatural is equally absurd,
Yeah.
But I find that
Right.
flawed.
Well, their whole belief system is absurd, because
Right.
it's all of this, all of what we witness, the creation and everything spawning from nothing. You can't get more absurd than that.
Right. Yeah, there's a
One,
lot of absurdity and self-contradiction in atheism.
yeah, 1 second. I'm just gonna grab a drink real quick, if that's okay.
Sure. No problem. I'll look at the chat a little bit more. Yeah, Galatians 5:23. Do you mean 3:28, or because usually I quote 5:23 on the women's issue, but I'm not sure what you're. Can't remember the last time I referred to it. Lots of people here. Thanks. Hoping to see more, but yeah, I don't believe in atheists. There was a billboard somebody made once that said it was a counter to the one on the statement that God was dead. Oh, I think it said Nietzsche is dead, signed God, because Nietzsche, I think, is the one who came up with that God is dead phrase back decades ago. All right. Yeah, I put the link there for this quick reference sheet. I have a whole bunch of quick references. That happens to be the first one since it starts with A. Fun fact on Star Trek, I believe that their little emblem in the upper left side of their chest that they would touch when they wanted to talk to somebody or whatever was a stylized atheist symbol. Of course, Gene Roddenberry, I think I get my names right, my atheist names right, who invented the Star Trek series, was, of course, what we would call a rabid, drooling atheist. You back, Teal?
Yeah.
Okay.
And there was an atheist philosopher. I'm trying to think of his name, and I can't. It's not coming to my mind. But his big question that kind of got me considering and thinking again regarding my atheist position was basically why not commit suicide? I mean, if you come down to it, that was the basic question, because with an atheist worldview, this life is for nothing.
Right.
So suffering, and so the question really is, do you want to live or do you want to die? Because, I mean, hey, if you're suffering, you might as well just knock yourself out, because there's nothing else beyond this. I mean, and that really just got me thinking about, why are we here? Is there a purpose? Is there a reason behind it? And it just makes more sense to me that there is. It doesn't make sense that this would all be for nothing, and especially with how short life really is.
Right. And it's also a matter of ultimate justice, too. There was a book, speaking of suffering as well, ties into this. There was a book, Why Bad Things Happen to Good People, by Rabbi Kushner, and his argument was that God he cannot be both all good and all powerful, because suffering happens. And the argument was limited to whether justice or health is seen in this life, and he negated the next life completely. And what atheism does is make it absolute that if justice is not achieved in this life, if healing and improvement is not made in this life, then it will never happen. And so there are an awful lot of people who, according to atheism, literally got away with murder and will never be punished for it, and the victim is never compensated. And I find that more objectionable than the fact that bad things happen here, is that there will never be ultimate justice.
Right. Well, and the scary thing about it, this whole belief that this life is for nothing, and that you can just, nothing beyond this. The scary thing about that is, and you see this happening in atheistic circles, where they talk about legalizing euthanasia. I can't even say it.
Yeah, you had it. Euthanasia.
Yeah, termination of life. Right. To legalize that. Well, why make somebody continue living if they're suffering? Let's just go ahead and humanely eliminate their life.
Yeah, why should life be precious?
Yeah, they give no hope to the suffering at all. Oh, the suffering, well, I'm sorry, you're just made to suffer for no apparent reason, and there's no hope for you.
Yeah, and I don't see any evolutionary advantage in people being altruistic, and caring whether anybody suffers or trying to make the world a better place for the next generation. It's not consistent with atheist belief and evolutionary belief, because evolution is a very selfish philosophy when you really look at it. It's all about.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. Why don't they be humane and just take out all of those who are suffering? Just take them all out in one swoop. Well, why? Under their worldview, they have no reason to allow them to continue. What's the reason? Are they going to say that it's morality? Well, they have no basis in morality. Why? What's the what? I'm trying to think of the right way to word this. Why should we be moral?
Right. It doesn't make any sense.
That was the big question. Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen debates on that. Is morality possible without a higher power, without a deity? And
Without a moral lawgiver, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it has to be someone who is above us in some way, because otherwise it's just people's opinions. It doesn't, there's no one with authority, therefore it's all just a matter of opinion. There's no one above us that our more sense of morality comes from, and therefore it becomes just pragmatism.
Well, I mean, do as I will is the whole of the law, right? I mean,
Right.
that's the mentality that they take on, which was Aleister Crowley, which was into the occult and Satanism. I don't think that they see how much their ideology is actually satanic.
Right. It is. And it's nonsensical in so many ways and self-contradictory, and it ignores the philosophical problem of first cause. All they do with all the stuff you were mentioning earlier is move the goalposts. They make the big numbers and the long distances so that everything they can't answer, which is origins, is put into a place, the multiverses, whatever. All of that stuff is so far removed from us that it can never be falsified, which makes it unscientific from the start.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
it's a denial. It really is. It's just denial.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, that the big question for me that really started to get me to re-question atheism was that question: why should we be moral? Not why do we? They
Right.
always, when you ask that question to them, they always think you're saying why do we, and then they'll come up with, well, it's because I enjoy this life and I want this life to be the best possible for me, so I treat other people good because I want to be treated good. And I'm
Right.
like, well, yeah, but why should you if there's no ultimate reason, if there's no ultimate purpose behind it? Why? All the troublemakers, all the sufferers, those who are suffering, let's just take them all out. I mean, that would be better, right, for humanity. I mean, they have this
Right.
whole humanist mentality.
Yeah, and it's evolutionary to the core. Atheism couldn't exist without it, but when you think about it, then what evolution wants is survival of self. It doesn't care. It wouldn't want competitors. Everyone else in a evolutionary scenario is a competitor. And if people can, with their higher intellect, cooperate for something that might benefit them, yes, but in evolutionary terms, it makes no sense at all. It's like, well, and so what? Who cares if you save the whales or the spotted owls? Why should the Earth be happy and balanced? Why does anything matter? So what if the world blows up in a nuclear holocaust, if there are such things as nukes? So what? That's where atheism and evolution lead you.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I had a thought, but I think I kind of lost it. It'll come
Sorry.
back to me.
I've been showing in the background here a little bit of a page that I linked to from the other document I had up about where William Craig Lane, I always get it, let me see if I,
William Lane
Craig.
Craig.
I get those mixed up all the time. But I've been showing his response to the question of what atheism really is and whether it means simply lack of belief or a belief in lack. And he says it's the latter. It's a statement of non-belief, which gives them the burden of proof to defend their non-belief. That it is a negative, and atheists will complain that they can't prove a negative, but if they assert a negative, they still have to prove it. It's just stupid for them to do it.
Well, right. Any positive claim that someone makes, they're supposed to be able to give justification for that claim. So if they make the positive claim, even though it's negative in nature, it's a positive claim to say gods don't exist.
Right.
That is right. It's so they need to be able to back that up. So they need to back it up. They need to be able to present evidence to suggest that God doesn't exist.
Right. It's the whole understanding of burden of proof. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they tend to shift that burden because they don't want that burden to lie on them.
Right.
And then they try to use the excuse, well, well, you have to prove his existence before I can disprove it. Really? What?
No.
If I prove his existence, then your position's flawed anyway. It's out the door. So what are
Right.
you talking about there?
Right. It's just it runs in circles. It's a very circular argument that they make. You have to
Yeah.
prove something before you prove it. It's just like something, that is self-created, which they allege the universe or universes are. That's existing before it existed, which is impossible. And if they believe in some kind of eternal regression, which I've heard a lot of people say even today, eternal regression doesn't answer any questions whatsoever. It's just saying, the goalposts are so far away, we don't have to deal with it anymore. Yet we have to prove God, but they don't have to prove their endless regression. So, and they make the claim, so they're still stuck.
Right. Well, I remember what I was going to say a while ago. I remember when I was an atheist, I used to always claim, if I didn't have standards, I would be a deceitful person. I would lie to the gullible just to make money.
Right.
And I remember saying that because, like you said, in the atheist worldview, it's a selfish worldview. It's pretty much, hey, it's about my survival. I've got to make it, and I don't care who gets the short end of the stick, so long as I'm not the one getting the short end of the stick.
Right.
Survival of the fittest here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, really, where did that standard even come from? Why would I even have a moral standard to not try to fool the gullible for money? Under an
Right.
atheist worldview, there's no justification for it. So, why not go ahead and be a false clergy
Right.
or a false religious spiritual leader to try to, and what's crazy about that, Paula, is it's the religious leadership. And here you have, they even have a site. What is it called? I can't remember what it's called, but it's for unbelieving clergy.
Oh, okay. I know I've heard of that. I can't think of it either right now.
Yeah. Oh no, my headset's messing up. I'm probably gonna have to. Man, I thought I recharged all this, but I think my charger cord might be messed up. So I'm gonna have to switch out my mic and headset and everything. I might be a couple minutes.
All right, no problem. We'll fill it with something. All right, chat's been moving a little bit. Some side conversations going on. Does anybody have any questions for Teal, Eve, when she comes back? About, anything else about the time when she was an atheist and what brought her back out of it? She's already pretty much explained that when you're an honest truth seeker, that you keep examining what you believe, and just because you went from one place to another doesn't mean you improved, that you got more truth than you had before. Let's see. Yeah, as far as I don't want to get off on the eternal soul issue because that's a long topic of its own. But if anybody has something to say about atheism in general or Teal in particular, let me know. And hopefully she'll be able to reconnect here in a minute. How do you reach approach an atheist? It's probably going to matter. Everybody's an individual, but some are nice. Most that I've met online tend to be the trolls, especially early college students in their first or second year who think they're scientists and that science automatically blows away theism and that evolution must be true. And I have been to college and I know that even the professors will engage in mockery all the time of anyone who doesn't believe Darwin and doesn't accept naturalism. And so they keep spreading this disease through the professors and peer pressure. And this is very unscientific of them to mock people who don't agree with them. That's not what a real scientist would do. But it's going to depend. You just have to what I would say in general for a strategy is try to keep them on the hot seat, make them defend their belief. And it is a belief. They believe that God does not exist, that the supernatural does not exist. And they make a claim, therefore they have the burden of proof. So make them play defense. It's much harder to defend what you believe than to attack someone else. Attack is easy. So, and for all these, since Darwinism really took hold, Christians, theists have been on the defense, on the witness stand, kept under the spotlight all the time, having to constantly defend. And the people who attack us would never submit to that kind of relentless inquisition. So I would say try to keep them questioning what they believe and questioning science as it is so called, and just keep them on defense and don't let them try to do what's it's fallacious to say, well, my belief is better than yours and here's what you believe. No, the question is, what do you believe? You defend it, and not let them turn it into you defending what you believe. Keep them on the hot seat. Okay, how hard was it to deal with all the Christian doctrines that tear apart the clear love of God into a cold-hearted doctrine of man-centered Christianity? Are you asking us in general or Eve in particular? Oh, I see she's back. That's good. Has it working? I don't hear you if you're talking.
Yeah. Can you?
Yeah, there you are.
Is it too low? Hold on.
It's just right now.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. I charged my PlayStation headset that I usually use on here too, and I charged it overnight, but I think there's something wrong with my charger cord because it did not last long at all.
Oh, that happens.
So
there's a question for you in the chat. It says, how hard was it to, you probably heard me reading that, to deal with all the Christian doctrines that tear apart the clear love of God into a cold, hard doctrine of man-centered Christianity?
What?
It's kind of, I'm not exactly clear. I've read it twice and I'm like,
I'm not, I mean, if they could give an example of what they're referring to, I might be able to answer that a little bit better, but I'm not so sure what they're,
yeah, Mark, if you
exactly
could clarify, which Christian doctrines, like give some examples of Christian doctrines that do that.
I do know that what atheists do is they eliminate responsibility of humanity, and they do not see the bigger picture. So what's going on is they look at the problem of suffering in the world, and they conclude that there's no God, because if there's, in their mindset, if there's suffering, can't be at least some morally good God, because they wonder why this, if there is a morally good God, why this God doesn't step in and stop the suffering. And that was a major thing that had me thinking, because of my son having autism that day that I got him back and him having the bruises. I remember calling my mom. I was distraught. I was crying. I was bawling, and I had my mom over. My mom came over, and I actually asked her, I said, why would God allow this to happen? Because I've prayed and prayed and prayed for years over the protection of my children, and especially Zachary, because Zachary's nonverbal autistic, and those children are at the most risk for abuse. And so, I was asking my mom, why would God allow this? And, my mom did not know how to answer that. The only thing that she could really say was, well, maybe he just allowed this to happen now so that you could, keep him from his father. And she was kind of right in a way, because I had struggled for years. I didn't want to be that type of mom that kept her kids from their dad vindictively, or, so for years I struggled. And and was confused about the best decision as a mom, if I should keep their dad in their lives, or if I should keep my children separate from their dads. So she kind of, I mean, it was kind of an answer, but it wasn't good enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
I still didn't understand why God allowed it to happen. And when I thought that, the thought came into my head, well, why is he even autistic to begin with? Why did God allow that to happen? Because, you know, he struggles with his autism constantly. And I've seen him before he even had his symptoms and signs of autism be a normal baby, and had even said two full sentences, had even said daily words, and I could see who he is behind his eyes at times. If that, I know that kind of doesn't make any sense, but and so, you know, that was a huge problem for me. But the thing is that atheists don't see the bigger picture, because the bigger picture is that right now, this fall that we're in, the fall of creation, was done by humanity. Not all of us, of course. It was Adam and Eve that did this, and they reproduced afterwards, which means they reproduced and had offspring into this fallen creation. And God has redeemed this creation, and he's promised to redeem this creation, and he has spiritually, and we're waiting on that physical redemption. But he's used the things that are negative from the fall, and he turns them around for the good. And I didn't recognize that at the time.
Exactly. I don't agree with the idea that people will say, well, God wanted this to happen so that. I'm like, no, God didn't want this to happen, but he will make something good out of it anyway. You know, if bad things are going to happen to you, he'll find a way to, in many cases, maybe not all. Some things I can't imagine how you can find redeeming value out of them. And it pains God that these things happen, but that's where trust comes in. You know, we trust the God we know.
Right. Well, and now I can see that even if we don't see a positive from a negative, it doesn't mean that there's not one that God's, you know, brought out of it. Right. We just might not witness it personally. It might be something for somebody else.
Right. We're not God, so we don't know all the ways, all the things that are going on. It's like people have described this life as looking at the underside of a tapestry or a crochet or whatever it is. I don't sew. So where the underside just looks like a bunch of tangled loops of threads, and then eventually you turn it over and there's this beautiful picture that somebody has sewn. And we see the underside, the tangled threads, and we can't figure out why everything is such a mess, but when we don't know what's really going to come of it in the end. So,
right.
Mark,
And sorry, go ahead. You can go ahead.
All right. Mark tried to clarify a little bit. He says something about, as you found God out of atheism, that something about 29,000 denominations, whether that was a hindrance, I guess he's asking.
That was, even though I used that as an atheist, which was kind of disingenuous, that was not a major issue for me, because just like the way that I see it now, I really do believe that personal relationships with God is a personal walk. And so people go through different spiritual growths. And there were times where I was wrong on doctrines and for years, you know, and then I'd realize, oh man, I've been wrong on that almost all my life on a certain doctrine or something. So the different denominations isn't really problematic for me. I think that there are some that when it comes to essentials and everything, we really have to be careful with that, if they, you know, the salvation essentials and stuff. But as far as just different secondary doctrines, that's not an issue for me, because I really just think that it's a personal growth thing, and that God's going to bring truth out of things in time for that individual whenever they're ready, you know. So
yeah, and when it comes to divisions in general, that's just a people problem. It's not a Christianity problem or anything like that, because atheists are divided, flat earthers are divided, flat and ball earth divided. That's what truth does. It unites some people and divides others. And people are flawed human beings. So they're going to disagree. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with one side or the other. It just means we're all human.
Well, and the thing is if we all had the answer, would we go to the feet of the Father for guidance?
Right. And
if we all had the answers of everything spiritual and of all of God's truth, then I don't think that we would seek God for those answers, because we'd already have them.
Right. And here we come back to trust again. And you trust someone you know. And I think, by this point, God has proven himself as, what the New Testament is mostly about is God saying, okay, I'll even stoop to this level. I'll become one of you and lift you up and buy your ticket out of here if you want it. And, what else can I do? And I think I'm going to trust somebody like that.
Right. Well, one thing, going back to the whole suffering thing, one thing that I realized once I started questioning atheism is, even though they're sitting here suggesting, well, with all this suffering, how can there be a good moral God just allowing these things to happen? Well, under an atheist worldview, it's for nothing. Zachary is suffering for no good apparent reason at all.
Right. Right.
And he'll never be rewarded for his suffering. In the atheist worldview, it's just all for bunk. It's all for nothing. Right.
It's an absolutely hopeless thing. And they would say, well, I would assume they would say, well, why have a false hope? Isn't it better to have no hope? And I'd be like, no. Hope, even if it's false, can wind up doing a lot of good for people and keep them going when they might quit otherwise, which to an evolutionary cold-blooded viewpoint would be good, because this person can stick around and help society, help the group, even though that itself is inconsistent. But most atheists will tell you they know right and wrong. I hear this all the time. They know right and wrong without reading a book. They know right and wrong without there being a God. And they are assuming wrongly that these senses of right and wrong come from within them, from their biology.
From their conscious, yeah. But then they'll argue subjective morality, which doesn't make any sense. I know some of them hold to a secular view of objective morality, but I find this to be very flawed, but I'll get back to that in a minute. But, they preach this subjective morality, but then yet they'll say, if you bring up, okay, so when is it ever okay that, for a woman to be raped or for abuse of a child? Well, it's never okay. Well, if it's okay in one culture and, they think it's okay, then why is it not okay? If you're all into subjective morality, I don't understand why you have such an issue with it.
Right. It's like one country's customs being, to, like you're saying, and especially in ancient times, they would sacrifice babies on a fire, on an altar, to Molech or whatever, and they thought this was good. And we think it's horrible. And a lot of other cultures thought it was horrible. The Bible said it was horrible. But the atheist, evolutionist, naturalist cannot justify one culture imposing their moral will on another culture. Why should they be able to?
Well, and they'll say something along the lines of, well, we have evidence that shows that it's not good for, it doesn't benefit society. It's not good for the benefit of society. Why does that matter? Why should you care even about society? Why should you even care even about that? I mean, there's no basis, there's no foundation in the moral view for being moral.
Exactly. It's like I was saying, you could just blow up the whole world, and what of it? Why is that immoral? Why is it wrong for dictators to mow down millions of people? Why is it wrong for the United States to drone people in the Middle East? Why is it wrong? They can't answer. They can't say it's anything more than their opinion.
Well, and I have a cousin who's also atheist, but I think he's starting to question things, thankfully, who's actually kind of a pessimistic nihilist type of atheist, where he believes humanity is like a virus. So why not wipe out all humanity? Beneficial for the earth, right?
So why should we benefit the earth?
Yeah. I mean, it always comes down to that, right? Why should we even care is basically the
Yeah.
question. If under an atheist worldview, there's no reason to even care.
Yeah, if the earth is just a random blue marble in the vastness of space, why does it matter that anything that happens here, why does it matter? And so what if there's other life forms in the universe? So what? It doesn't matter. The universe could cease to exist and it wouldn't matter. I don't see how they can justify, if they go, deductive reasoning here, just go reduce something down to, the thing before that and the thing before that. Eventually you hit a brick wall, unless you want to try the endless regression thing again, which is no answer at all. But,
Well, I have that same cousin in a hangout with another atheist, and I won't mention their name because they're pretty prominent on the internet. Because I had gotten them both together because I wanted to hear their viewpoints on morality when I was an atheist, because one of them, which was my cousin, claimed a more subjective morality, and the other person claimed a secular objective morality. So right. I wanted to hear this out, and I heard them go back and forth, and the person that claimed objective morality was getting a bit upset because, and I didn't realize it at the time until later on, I started to rethink about the conversation, but I know now why that he got upset, and that was because my cousin kept bringing up, well, why should that matter? Because he kept saying the guy with objective, from the objective standpoint, kept trying to say, well, it's for the benefit of human flourishing and things like that. And my cousin would be like, why should we care about human flourishing? Right. And he just kept bringing it back to that. And it bothered the other person. And I didn't recognize it at the time, why he was so bothered by it. But now I see why, because there's no
escape.
Yeah, there's no argument for a secular objective morality. There just isn't any. Right.
When you push them to defend, that's the thing I was saying when you took that little break with your headset. We have been content for too long to sit on the witness stand and be grilled and grilled and grilled. And they never have to sit there. And every time I've tried, I even did a little skit type video a long time ago on atheists, called Atheists on the Witness Stand. They won't stay there. They keep crawling off and want to be the prosecutor and, put everybody else on the witness stand as a defense. That's like, no, that's not a defense. That's avoidance. That's, deflection. They're trying to keep the spotlight off of them because they can't defend it.
Right. I'm really sorry, but Zachary's standing right beside me, so he wants something. So I'm gonna have to figure it out what he wants. I'll be right back.
Alrighty, no problem. Okay, chat. What's going on? Still discussing the Trinity. I did give a link about what I think about arguments against the Trinity. Chat raids. Yeah. Chat rage is a bad idea. I understand people wanting to be zealots for a belief, but if Christians were doing chat raids, we'd never hear the end of it from people like IPS who are telling us we should do chat raids as flat earthers. They think the end justifies the means, but they resent it when somebody else would try the same tactic. They would call it trolling, and they know they're trolling. And in my opinion, its whole purpose is to make us look like a bunch of idiot trolls who are only after money from marketing flat earth. And I've never trusted the guy from the beginning for a multitude of reasons, even before we get to the religion issue. It's things like this that just keep proving me right about my first hunches about the guy. But it disturbs me more how many people follow him. The Pied Piper can play all he wants, but if nobody follows, nothing, no harm, no foul, but so many people are following. You mentioned Unitarianism. I have a quick reference for that too. Actually, it's more universalism. which is very much related to Calvinism in many respects. And I'll see if I can find that too. I know I have a separate article on that that's not on my quick reference. Let me just see if I can find that. Hold on a second, and I will get the link for you. It's just laggy because I've got too many. Anytime I do a live hangout, I have to be concerned about things crashing. Let's hope they don't crash. But I will find that. There it is. There's the article I want. I will put a link in the chat. The article is called Calvinism and Universalism Separated at Birth. Very many similarities between the two, and Calvinism often leads to universalism. Unitarianism, though, is more of as my understanding, is more of a oneness theology where there is no Trinity. God is only, there is God, and he just wears different hats at times. But the earlier link I gave about the Trinity would deal with some of those arguments. But yeah, we're all just throwing our opinions around, and there is room for disagreement, and disagreement is a human.
What's going on with the hats? Like, how come God can wear different hats, and we got to take our hat off when we go into church? But then there are some churches or synagogues where they have to have a hat on. So what's the hat rule? Hats on, hats off. Women have to wear hats, and some they don't wear hats, and others. What's going on with the hats? Is it a head chakra thing?
No. And in case anybody doesn't know, this is Jibby, my buddy Jibby. And he always has to come up with those questions, but there are at least attempted answers, I will say. With the hat thing, it's more culture than anything else. And when the Bible talks about it in the New Testament, basically Apostle Paul says, you figure it out, judge for yourselves. We don't have a rule about it. That's 1 Corinthians 11 for anybody who wants to know. Because people were asking him, he's doing a question and answer thing, and we're only seeing the responses. And they had asked, well, here's the deal. Men are, in Judaism, men were supposed to cover their heads as a sign of shame when they were before God in his presence. And yet in Christianity, people were told that men should not cover their heads because they're the glory of God, and the shame has been removed by Jesus. But in that culture, still, a woman who did not cover her head was considered to have loose morals. But if she did cover her head, she was having a sign of shame on her head. So what do we do? And Paul was like, can't you figure it out? Just, it's the woman's head on the line, quite literally. She can be beheaded or killed or some other way for whether or not she wears something on her head in that culture. So leave it up to her and let her figure out whether she wants to put a covering on her head, because there's no rule about it. It's nothing. It's nothing that God said in the Bible to do. So it's really a non-issue. And Teal says she's back. Hey, Teal.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about this. It probably would have been easier to do it during the school year, but my kids are out for school, so
no problem at
all. Where was we at? I can't even.
I don't remember either. I got sidetracked on the Trinity. But Jimmy was asking about it. So, and Mark.
What is your view of the Trinity?
Mine?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had put a link out where I explained, I have a whole article. I go over the scriptures on various things. And my view is that I support the Trinity. I guess I could share that article if you want to see it, and hope nothing crashes once again. Make sure.
I do know that there's a lot of people that don't hold to the Trinity. I happen to hold to it as well.
Yeah, wrong document there. Sorry, I had looked up one on universalism, and then I realized, I've got it confused with Unitarianism, which is not the same. But I went back farther than I thought on the Trinity. Oh, where is it? Let me just go get my link. There we are. I know this symbol here that I've got on my article, it was for a philosophical something or other page, I forget, but somebody made one that it kind of fits with the idea of the Trinity, but I don't put a lot of stock in the picture anyway. It's just there to have a picture with my article. But what I did is I broke it down. I said, here's verses about the unity of the one true God, which is against tritheism, meaning three gods. So this shows that Father, Son, and the Spirit are all one God. Then I said the diversity of the persons. On the other hand, we have verses that talk about this is against modalism, which is the hat-wearing God, meaning God, one God with three roles or manifestations. So these are verses that mitigate against modalism. And then I did verses that talk about the overlapping functions of the three, Father, Son, and Spirit. And then I go into whether the Son is divine, which, as a little side trivia, was the topic of the Council of Nicaea and Constantine. It had nothing to do with the Bible canon or content. All Constantine wanted was for the bishops to stop squabbling over whether Jesus was divine. Arguing for that it came up because there was somebody named Arius who was arguing that Jesus was not divine, that he was a created being. And he was countered in a series of debates by Athanasius, after whom a creed is named, who argued that Jesus is divine and not a created being. So anyway, I did the divinity of the Son. I supported that. And then I went over whether the Holy Spirit is a divine sentient person and not just a force or emanation of God or just a spirit of God like we have spirits. This is a separate personal being. So I believe that in my conclusion, there's one God composed of three persons, each of which is fully God and not a physical or gendered entity. Jesus alone has a dual nature as both divine and human, the latter of which was physical and gendered at his incarnation. Critics of this view, whether believers or unbelievers, have to ignore or reinterpret all these passages in order to claim otherwise. So that's, I know I beat around the bush, but there it is.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I might have to take a look at that because currently I'm under the impression, that I do find the Trinity to be a valid stance.
Right. Okay. Let's see. There's a question for me. Do I go to church or not? I currently do. I didn't for about 10 years. I had been in church for 47 years without a break first. Before that, and I quit cold turkey. I had it. I had been under a conviction for several years before that this was not what the New Testament said we were supposed to be doing. But I did find also after those 10 years that while I was always online keeping up with, talking to other Christians, talking to non-Christians, my family was not. And I decided for a lot of reasons that they needed a more personal, local group of Christians to hang out with. And I found one, actually my son found one from a friend of his who suggested, after we told them what we were looking for, that there was a small church that is very laid back, very minimalist. I still think they could take a few more steps, and I'm there because I think I could convince them maybe to take those few steps and get back to the New Testament church the way it was supposed to be. But yes, I am currently attending one.
Yeah, and I'm not. And I haven't for years. And but I do think, I think kind of along the same lines as you do, that it would be beneficial, at least for my children, if I did take them. The problem is with Zachary, but they did have a meeting. My sister told me that they had a meeting here in the city that I am. All the churches had a meeting of how to try to implement care for special needs, so that, so hopefully that'll be done and I'll be able to find something to get my kids into. I do think that it would be beneficial for my children, but at the same time, for me, I've never liked the whole church concept, because you have one person that's trying to tell you what truth is.
Right.
And to me, in order to learn, I think that it's better to get different views from brothers and sisters and not just one specific view from a brother or sister.
Right.
So
what I'm actually trying to get them to do is that what I've noticed in these hangouts is that people form friendships and then they want to meet in person. And I said, well, you know what? I think if we did hangouts just as Christians, as a local church, it's, for one thing, non-threatening situation. People can come and go. You don't have to know who they are. They can just be in the chat. They can ask questions that they wouldn't ask in church. And they may, because of that, want to meet with us locally, and then we can help them even more. And what this church does is they're more focused on helping out in the community, feeding the poor, actually doing things to help each other, and very light on the theology. It's more of a, it used to really bother me when people wouldn't get into the deep questions of the Bible, and it still does. But if you see it as just a gathering of Christians who just want to sing praises to God and just see each other face to face and, have something for the kids, that's great. It serves that purpose.
Right. It's good for fellowship, but it's not so much good for getting into the meat. They kind of stay on the milk in these churches, right, and don't get into the meat. And with me, I also find it problematic because, and I'm not knocking on the church I grew up in. There was a lot of great things about the church that I grew up in. The pastor that I grew up with, I ask that you all keep him in your prayers because he's actually an atheist now. And I see atheism on the rise, and that's why I think that this hangout is very important. And I think that it's on the rise because we're being fed a false reality. The more you look at stats, the more that someone is, quote, educated, unquote, which I think is indoctrinated, mm-hmm. the more that that they're likely to be an atheist when they end their college degrees and stuff.
Right.
There's got to be something to that. Now, I think, atheists try to say, oh, it's because they're more intellectual, they're learning more. No, it's because they're getting indoctrinated.
Exactly.
Right. And hearing a false reality that's making them question and doubt. And this is what I was telling you yesterday, that I think it's very important for Christians when you guys are engaging with atheists or when you're watching atheists, be sure to pray before and afterwards, because the reality of the matter is that we are in a spiritual battle between good and evil, God and Satan. And the atheist, regardless if they know it or not, are pushing Satanism and are pushing that side of the battle. And right. So you have to be very, very careful when you're engaging with atheists or when you're listening to their content or things like that, and be sure to pray over that.
Right. And the churches, all the years I was in growing up and still today, don't prepare Christians for the world at all. The Bible even says, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope you have, not just a testimony or a sharing of experiences, but an answer. And there's instances of Christians debating vigorously in public, with the Jews or whoever it was. Not everyone is cut out for that. And I understand everybody's at different stages of growth. Everybody is at different stages of commitment as far as how you live after you're saved. And I'm not going to try to force anything down anybody's throat. What I would do is, like, in my habit of just making videos on my site or articles on my my blogs, that people, it's just there if anybody wants it. And with the churches, I think there should be a place where people who are interested or don't even know what questions to ask is half the problem, because the churches don't even raise the questions, and people don't know what to say when they get out in the world and somebody challenges them. And so their faith falls away easily because they think we have no answers. And I think that's where a hangout can really be useful, because in churches, that's not going to happen. People don't go there for that reason. They go to church to sing and pray and see each other and say hi and go eat. That's why people go to church.
Yeah.
And
they do not get into the meat. Yep.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. It's fine, but they can't stop there. But I'm not going to make anybody go anywhere but that. What I'll do is go there and say, there's more if you want it, but they don't even know there's more.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do, at least in this case, try to help one church, take that other step. And we have the internet,
Yeah. Well, and another problem that I have with churches is for one, we are the believers are the church. The church isn't some building with four walls. The believers are the church, and the problem that I have is we see all throughout Scripture infiltration of wolves and things like that into the truth and into the body of Christ. There's infiltrators, and
Right.
I know that growing up in the church that I grew up in, now looking back, there was about 4 or 5 that I can just name off the top of my head. I won't do that, of course, but I can name off the top of my head that are in prison now for child molestation.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, having an autistic son, where that is more of a risk for for special needs kids than regular kids, I see it as a grounds for, as a target for
Right.
predators, because
Exactly.
they know, they know that these churches are filled with people that are trying to trust one another.
Right.
And so they infiltrate it and do things, and it's terrible. So, you know, that's been something that I just wanted to keep my kids from, because I feared that.
Right.
And, you know, especially with Zach, because he can't tell me things. So
Yeah, that is a big problem. In my years of hanging around mostly with the egalitarians, so many horror stories of what happened to especially girls when they were young in the churches, because, like you said, a Sunday school or a nursery is a prime, target for any kind of predator, child predator, because of the trusting atmosphere, because it's a church. People think, oh, this person has been vetted, that's in charge of the area, or these teachers or workers are kind-hearted volunteers who wouldn't hurt a fly. And when there is little evidences here and there that something's going wrong, people don't want to believe it. And often people who did report it, especially the victims themselves, were humiliated in front of the congregation for opening up and whistleblowing. This is such a huge problem. People think it's just the Catholic priests doing these things, but it isn't. It's the Southern Baptist Convention, it's the Lutherans, it's anybody. These are prime targets.
Yeah, and my church was non-denominational, so it's not even pinpointed on a certain denomination or anything. We are going to have infiltrators. The Bible speaks all throughout about wolves. So yeah, that is a big problem, and we're too unwilling to listen to whistleblowers and victims. So much damage has been done by that. I wouldn't blame anybody for not going to church again. That's one good thing, at least if you can stay anonymous in some way on the internet, is you can interact with people from a safe distance. So I think it has a lot of advantages, and it's in this day and time, there's no reason why we couldn't take advantage of this technology. Yeah, it has its bad beginnings and purposes, and it's a spy tool, but it's there. They're using it. We might as well use it too. And I think that's that's right. I think that God is already using the technology that we have. The scriptures talk about in the end times, knowledge will be increased. And I think that's exactly what's going on. And I think that it's spiritual knowledge to the believers. God's opening up some spiritual truths that we didn't grasp before. Such as the whole flat earth, such as the equality that you've been speaking about, equality in Christ, and how the hierarchy system is based off the fall. It's not based off of how God originally created things. And the hierarchy system is all throughout church history. So I think that this is something that God is trying to, use his people to bring to light.
Right. Yeah, that is a big advantage that we have now that we've really never had before. I mean, you could write letters or whatnot, but this is the first time you have nearly instant communication with people all over the world. It's really
well, and also you reach a lot more people than you would just physically, because I know that at least when I was an atheist, I think it was around 10,000 views on my channel.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, 10,000 people coming to view your channel in 2 years, because I was an atheist. I was about an atheist for about 4 years, but I was, it took me a while to actually get on here and start speaking out on it. But yeah, that many views in that short of time.
Yeah, I'm happy if I get tens of views.
Well, over time you'll get some, even, I don't mean to just say that it's just because I was an atheist. You'll get more views here on the internet, even as a Christian, than you would just, going around your county or your.
Right. Yeah. It is. No, go ahead.
It's from people all over the world too. So you have people that are coming from certain cultures that may not even know a whole lot about Christianity, that are able to witness it and hear it and everything. Right.
Which is kind of a flip side of a claim that has been traditionally made, that the reason only Christianity gets picked on online is because that's the prominent religion of the Western world, and that's why you're a Christian, because you grew up in the West and all that. And I'm like, well, after the internet's been around for this long, I don't think that argument holds water anymore, because we are exposed to all kinds of ideas, and they're exposed to ours. The people who didn't hear about Western religious ideas are exposed to them now. So I don't think that argument holds water anymore.
Well, I don't think that argument holds water, just because I sit there and saw atheists defending Islam,
right? Yeah,
over Christianity, and which to me, I was like, why would you be defending Islam? I don't get it. To me, Christian, and at this time being a cultural Christian but not actual Christian, to me it seems that Christianity at that time, I was trying to defend Christianity. I was saying it, Christ taught to love and things like this, where you have Islam that's the exact opposite,
right,
of these moral values that we see coming from Christianity. You see Islam has the exact opposite. So why would you be defending it? I don't get it. Islam's not, it doesn't even, it shouldn't even fit with their whole idea of humanity flourishing.
Right.
And yet you see them defending it. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know what to tell anybody to do about any of that, because either a person is a truth seeker like you, or they're not. They're either going to be willing to question their disbeliefs, or they're not. It's just going to be a by person basis, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that the whole atheism, and it is a religion. I'm sorry, but it is.
Right.
I think the whole atheist religion is more. It strokes the intellect ego.
Mm-hmm.
It's a religion that's based on glorifying man's knowledge.
Right.
Which we know what the scriptures say about that the wise of the world are the foolish in God's eyes, right?
Right.
So they think that they know stuff. They think they know what they're talking about, and they don't.
Right.
And I think that atheists kind of glorify that. They think that they're intellectual. They think that they're intelligent and smart, and they and that's why they feel good in the atheist position.
And they call themselves free thinkers. They've made up a word, put free and thinker together into one word, and call themselves free thinkers and free thought. It's like there's nothing. There was a site called Ex-atheist.com where she said, "I'd rather be a disciplined thinker than a free thinker." It's such an oxymoron. I mean, they don't realize how hypocritical they're being, calling themselves free from religion, maybe, but not really free from religion, free from theism. They're more into manism, or whatever you want to call it. And that was actually
right.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, they're free from having to strive to uphold God's standards. Is the only thing that they're free from. They are bound, are slaves to sin. They are slaves to the world system. They are slaves to mankind. They are slaves to the government. And the only thing that they're even skeptical of, and they claim that they're these skeptics and everything, the only thing that they're skeptical of is religion. That's it. They're not skeptical of their government. They're not skeptical. And I have a friend, a pretty close friend that is atheist, and this is the same fellow that was in the hangout that I was talking about with my cousin, who tends to think that mankind are generally honest.
Not what I see.
And so that to me, that's just a position that he upholds, so he doesn't have to question the main story, the official story, the elite, those who are in rulership positions and power positions. Well, let's not question them, because we're generally honest people. I mean, that's the mentality that I get from him. And the fact is humanity's not honest.
Right.
They're dishonest. Even in their so-called search for truth, a lot of these people are not really searching for truth. They're searching for comfort, whatever makes them feel better.
Right. And they're selective skeptics. They're only skeptics of certain things.
Certain things that make them feel uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I was thinking of, I think it was the first or one of the first episodes of the TV Star Trek series, where Captain Pike was the captain, and they were on a planet where these aliens with great big heads were making simulations, basically, were benevolent prisons. They were everything a person could want. Everything was pleasant and benevolent and happy, and nothing bad happened. And they discovered it by the end of the show that humans just don't like being in a prison, even if it's a happy, benevolent place. And that is the atheist religion in a nutshell, because they don't want God over them, even if God is kind to them and makes a realm like this that was originally happy and benevolent and everything was perfect. They don't want God over them, is the thing. And that's Satan's rebellion to a core.
Mm-hmm. Yes. They want to be over themselves, but the fact is they're not even over themselves. Somebody else is over them. And if they look to mankind to be their authority, or themselves, in other words,
right,
they're looking to humanity, and eventually someone's going to have authority over them in humanity. The fall, all it produces is a pyramid hierarchy.
Right. And that's what Jesus was talking about when he said, "Not so among you." He said, that the rulers of the world, have command over those under them, and they have benefactors that they're called themselves. And he says, not that way in the kingdom of God. The greatest is the least, the first will be last, all those things. Jesus came to do so much more than just buy our ticket out of here if we want it. He came to change everything. People don't realize that. They don't, and that's getting back to the church thing. People think it's just religion 2.0. They think that it's just, as I have this in an appendix in my book, where the historian Philip Schaff noted in his studies that after the apostles died, it wasn't long before people lapsed back into their religious practice, whether they were the Jews with their priesthood and priesthood and temple, or the non-Jews, the Gentiles, with their pagan gods and high priests and mid-level priests and the whole hierarchical structure. Both Jews and Gentiles had it, and that's what they thought of as religious and how you related to God. And even though Jesus had spent his life as an adult showing what it was really like, it wasn't about, even though he was an observant Jew, what he taught his disciples as the foundation of the church to come was that this was something totally different, where we're all brothers and sisters. Call no one rabbi, call no one father. You're all brothers and sisters, and we're, that he is going to, as he told the Samaritan woman of all people, the time had come to worship God in spirit and truth instead of in Jerusalem or on this mountain or wherever. He was in that conversation doing away with all religious practice. And in my video on Babylon, I showed that that's where the roots of false religious practice began, way back in Babylon. And that kind of activity, what people know as religion, has persisted ever since. And people try to lay blame on the Bible, when, yes, the Jews practice religious things, but Jesus came to do away with that because he fulfilled it. And it's now just the relationship. It's like the Bible says in a couple of places in the New Testament, true religion is looking after orphans and widows in their distress. It's taming your tongue. It's being kind to people, even if they're not kind to you. That's what religion was meant to be. And Jesus said, where 2 or 3 gathered, there I am. He didn't talk about one of them having to be a priest or one of them having to be a man or anything like that. You know, he's there when 2 or 3 gathered, and it's the Holy Spirit that's supposed to be running the show. People want to get in the way of the Holy Spirit by having their hierarchy or their privileges or their chains of command. And it just amazes me that so far, you know, within a generation of the apostles dying, that people have gone back to that. I just don't understand it.
Right. Well, I mean, he pretty much dismantled the hierarchy system of the fall. And that's the reason they wanted to kill him, was because he was taking the power of the religious elite of that time, the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he was taking it away from the people, the power that they had over them.
Right.
You know, he was basically saying, you guys have no power. And, you know, of course they wanted to eliminate him because he was changing things up.
Right. It was a threat to the slave system that Satan had set up in the Garden of, you know, right there in the Garden of Eden. You know, at the fall, he set that up.
Right.
And anytime somebody's teaching Luciferianism, Gnosticism, that's what they're teaching, is the worldly way, the way of Satan with the hierarchies.
Well, and I don't think that they, those in the body of Christ, I don't think enough people are waking up to that.
Right.
That truth. It seems like they really think that God has established this type of hierarchy in the home and in the church. And after taking a look at some of your material, and you got to ask yourself this question, okay? If the Bible says that we are all one in Christ, that there is neither male or female, it is neither Jew or Gentile, that we're all one in Christ, you've got to ask yourself the question of, okay, then what does this specific verse that they always proof text for hierarchy, what does it mean? What does it really mean? It can't be going against this idea that we're all one in Christ.
Right.
So what else could it be possibly meaning?
Well, they have to decide, people who push hierarchy have to decide whether the Bible is contradicting itself, because it has to, if those other proof texts are true the way they understand them. I don't mean to say not that they're not true, but that their misunderstanding is what the problem is, because it creates that contradiction. And what they will do is try to dance around it and say, well, we're all equal, but. And it's the equal but that's the problem. It's like Orwell wrote, not 1984, but Animal Farm, where we get the statement, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so they, you know, it was the pigs in that story that made themselves a kind of a ruling class, you know. And so that's what people do when they try to reconcile this contradiction their interpretations have created, and say that, well, Jesus said not so among you, and Paul wrote you were all one, but Paul also said that woman has to obey her husband, right? No, he didn't say that, but they think he does. So they get around it by saying, okay, well, they're equal in being, but not equal in role. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but being female is not a role we play. We can be a wife, a mother, a worker, but those are roles, because we can stop doing those things, but we can't stop being women. And so that is not a role to play. It's an intrinsic quality of being. And so whatever is said about us as women is being said about us as beings, as humans. And if we are to be restricted in ways that men are not, just because of our flesh, then that is a statement against us as humans, making us subsets. And there's no way philosophically to get around that problem, and no way biblically to get around the problem of creating a contradiction if they believe that there is a flesh-based hierarchy. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and if you exchanged it for race, I think people would clearly see there's a problem here, that is fleshly based. It's not based on the spirit.
Right.
Yeah.
Separate but equal. That doesn't mean, you know, they tried to say, well, you got the same facilities, they just have to be separate. And that very concept of separateness even though they claim it's equal and they can demonstrate you got the same facilities, everybody saw eventually through the charade that having a separate facility at all means there's non-equality. It's a separation. It's a teaching of division. And like I mentioned in that article in the other hangout about one I had written called back in 2009, I think it was, called Sound Familiar, where there's an exact parallel between what arguments people used to make from the Bible to support slavery in the United States are just change the names and you have the same mentality and argumentation for women. And people who would never say that you should be separate but equal due to your race would say you must be separate but equal to be due to your gender. And I cannot, for the life of me, understand why people can't see the hypocrisy in that double standard.
I don't either. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know.
Makes no sense. And this comes from, it's a secondary thing that comes from a primary issue of what Jesus came to do. And you would think Christians would understand that he didn't just come to pay for sins. He came to turn everything on its head. And by everything, I don't mean, somebody jumped on that I said the other day. I said, oh, you think Jesus came to destroy Genesis and all this stuff? And I'm like, no. Take me in context. I mean, I'm just saying the whole worldly system, the worldly mentality of a hierarchy and a religious practice and all the things Jesus said he came to undo, like the law. Hey, that's what he came to do.
Right. Well, and the way that Christ fulfilled the law was, he showed the ultimate love. That the scriptures talk about fulfilling the law is to love one another, right, in the New Testament. Because if you love one another, you won't break those 10 commandments. You won't break the law. And this can only be done through Christ, because we're so flawed that we're going to envy people at times. We're going to get in the flesh and break the law in some way. And that's the problem. And that's what separates us from God and the moral standards that God has. And Christ, he reconnected that severed Father, because he was able to show ultimate love by sacrificing himself for the world, and in his innocence, doing that. So I don't know. I'm just saying.
Right. Yeah, it's supposed to be so radically different, and it was the first century and a little bit into the second century. Where people did, just as Acts 2, they shared everything, and which is not communism, by the way, because it wasn't forced by an authority. Forced redistribution of wealth is communism, and it's robbing the rich to pay the poor, and that's not right. But they shared because they cared, and they were a community, and that's what a church was supposed to be: Christians in an area taking care of each other, because they were grateful, because they loved God and loved his people. And love has certain actions that, if it's genuine, it will result in certain things. And we're supposed to be taking care of each other. Now, our governments, with the heavy taxation and all of the other ridiculous things, makes it almost impossible for churches to be the charitable organizations, well, not even organizations, organisms that we were meant to be.
Well, I just happen to think, I'm kind of, I don't want to say I'm glad I went through those years of atheism, but it did teach me some things. And I'm just under the impression that, that even the change that Christ brought, that, like the first century that you were talking about, it didn't really last, because I really feel like it did last spiritually, but not, physically. And that's because I really think that, it's going to have to come down to the promise that he's going to physically redeem us, physical creation. Because without that physical redemption of creation, there's going to be, it's still in a fallen state. So it's always going to return to hierarchy and somebody ruling over others. And until it's Christ that is ruling over, then we're going to have some major problems. And that's why I don't understand all these people who have come to the flat earth truth, but they haven't come to the truth of Christianity, and they're pushing the same agenda as the elite and don't even recognize that that's what they're doing.
Right, exactly. I don't see either how a person can see that flat earth is the one conspiracy no other conspiracy theorists want to talk about. And it's, because it's true, it's the one that the elite don't want you to talk about. Well, so it's the same as true as Christianity and the Bible. This is the one that gets ostracized, the one that gets pushed to the side and mocked all the time. And people think it's a danger, just the way conspiracy theorists will say, well, flat earth makes us all look stupid. And it's a danger. It's a psyop. You can tell that's you're onto something when people start saying that. And the same should be obvious about Christianity and the Bible, but somehow people still don't go there because it's really the ultimate truth. And it's going to be the hardest fought against.
Right. And this is where I think, a lot of Christians have went astray is this, they've lost the reality that this is a battle, a spiritual battle. And so they have accepted things of the world. They have accepted wisdom of men as truth over God's word. And this is, extremely problematic. And another thing I think is problematic with the body of Christ is Christians not looking into evil. I know that we are supposed to refrain from evil, even in our sight and hearing evil and things like that. The Bible talks about refraining from those things, but at the same time, we are also supposed to be aware of Satan's devices. And so I think that there's a balance that should be there. And it's problematic when they don't recognize how evil the world is, because they end up becoming universalist or full preterist. They end up not recognizing the need for God's justice and judgment, and the need for his return.
Right. Yeah, it's another one of those balance points, between the need for God, recognizing our need that we're up against spiritualities and powers and principalities. People will hear that and say, well, that means you're teaching that we're helpless. Well, in a sense, we are. That doesn't mean we sit around on our hands and wait, because Jesus said, I'm going to come when you don't expect me, and I better find you busy. With his parables, he taught this. And he's given us things to do while we're here, but we must understand that this battle is not ours. We have to fight it, but we would lose without him. And so
and our offensive weapon is the word. It's not resulting, I've heard so many times throughout the years Christians talking about uprising physically and violently against the elite. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. Scriptures teach, first of all, that we are not battling with flesh and blood, but of principalities. And, it's a spiritual battle, not a physical one. And second of all, our sword is truth. That is what our weapon is truth. So speaking truth and living truth is the weapon against lies and deceit and evil in the world, not... if you raise up and you go against them physically and violently, you're just taking on you're just taking on the evil. You're just taking on fallen creation's way of things.
Right. And people will hear that and say, well, you mean you would just be passive, a doormat, and let people run over you and your family and not defend yourself? No, we're not saying that at all. Physical, personal self-defense is not forbidden by the Bible at all. You have to be able to defend yourself. And the Bible even says those who won't take care of their own family are worse than an unbeliever. So we have to defend ourselves. But the line is crossed when we go out offensively and say, we're going to tear society apart. We're going to tear the government apart because it's evil. Jesus lived under the Romans. I mean, the apostles lived under the Romans, and they were nasty and oppressive, but they did provide a stability, the Pax Romana, that allowed people to go about their lives within limits, but they could still go about their lives because the Romans were there to deal with very harshly with anyone who got too far out of line. It's just like The fact that if in a playground, if there's no teachers there, the little kids are going to start hurting each other. Whereas if there's a teacher watching them, they won't do that. And so it only really is a restriction for bad people. It's like the Bible says that the law is for the lawless. The laws are for those who don't have a sense of right and wrong, for the unrighteous. So what those things allow, those structures, even though they're evil, like the Roman government was, Jesus never advocated armed rebellion. He never talked much about the Romans at all. He talked about the people of Israel. He talked about how they should treat each other. And when the Bible talked about, Paul or anybody, Peter talked about slavery as an institution in that day, they said, get free if you can, if you have an opportunity, but if you're in slavery, here's how you act. If you're a slave owner, here's how you act, talking about Christians who owned or were slaves, because that's the structure of society. And if you pull the whole thing down, you hurt a lot of good with the bad. And that's why Jesus told that parable, one of the reasons, of the wheat and the weeds, that if you pull things up too soon, you will damage the good with the bad. And so things are, what Christians being salt and light means is we gradually affect society one person at a time so that it changes at a rate that is not so much upheaval all of a sudden that it does harm. And that's what we're supposed to be doing, is influencing society wherever we go, and changing it from within gradually. And so if we see that Paul taught that if you can get a chance to be free from slavery, take it, because you should not enslave yourself to anyone. Slavery is what it is right now, but once that changes, don't go back to it. And what he said about slaves is the same parallel as what he said about women in that culture, because there's no need to tell women who were oppressed and beaten and broken like horses, as I've heard the statement recently that women have to be broken and tamed like horses. That was a given in that society. And so why would Paul or Jesus or anybody talk about a woman needing to humble herself? She was already beaten into the ground. So what he's talking about is a woman in that culture had certain restrictions, just as a slave in that culture had certain restrictions. And as Christians, we had to be careful how we behaved in them. And that was not God's ideal. But just like Jesus said to the Pharisees who tried to trap him with a question on divorce, he said, they said, why did Moses say a man could just write a certificate of divorce and send a woman away? And Jesus said, he allowed that because of your hard hearts. But that's not what God intended.
Because of the fall, right? And that's the how I take it now. What I see going on is, and maybe we could talk a little bit more about like slavery in the Old Testament and everything, because I know that that's something that atheists bring up, is slavery. You had brought it up the other day. They go to the evilbible.com site and they bring up all these different issues such as slavery, but what I see going on is, that we're in a fallen state, and we're still waiting for the physical redemption of this fallen state. And so there are things in this fallen state that are inevitable. They're going to happen, such as the whole hierarchy system, because we are in a fallen state. And so, some of the things like such as divorce, I don't think, if you look at the scriptures as a whole, you see that God doesn't desire divorce. Right. That's not something he desired. He allowed it because there are certain
situations.
There's certain necessary evils within this fallen state. Just like if someone was to intrude into your home and you killed them to defend your family, well, you killing them isn't a good thing. I mean, you're justified in it because you were defending your family and everything. So you're justified in it, but it's still not a good thing. It's all because of the fall that you even had to do that.
Right.
And that's the same way that I'm seeing with, slavery and things like divorce and stuff. It's not that it's something desired by God. But it's something that he tried to give us a moral code of being able to deal with.
Right. It's just like if you study, like, Paul has a long section where he talks about marital relationships and what to do when a believer is married to a non-believer and so forth. And when he talks about divorce, he says, God does not want you to live in misery. If an unbeliever wants to leave, let them go, because you don't know that you're going to save them. This gets badly translated a lot, but he's saying, God doesn't want you to live in misery. He wants you to live in peace. And as you were saying, we're in this fallen world and people are not going to get along sometimes. And if it would be worse to force people to stay together when they're so antagonistic than to let them go and move on with their life. And the only stipulation Paul put on them was that the believer whose spouse has left them should marry another believer and try to minimize those differences, So he's not saying be cold and heartless. He's saying, try to get along if you can, but if you can't, don't force yourself to stay when it's clearly not working, either whether it's abuse or neglect. Those were valid reasons even in the Old Testament for divorce. And people don't realize that.
If we could go back to the slavery for a second, the way that I see the whole slavery issue in regards to some of the Old Testament passages talking about slavery and how they should treat their slaves or their servants. I know that there's distinctions there. There's indentured servitude and there's also just regular slavery in the Old Testament. But I think something that atheists don't consider, like I said, they always seem to avoid the bigger picture of things. And one thing that they don't consider is how things were in that time period.
Right.
For example, now we have the government and our militaries that pretty much take care of us. We don't have to fend for ourselves against other tribes out there. We don't have to, protect our own tribe from other tribes because we have this big military that protects us, right?
Right.
But in those times, they didn't have military. They didn't have prisons. They didn't have jail cells, at least not in the Old Testament days. It doesn't seem like, at least I don't get that impression.
The Romans did. They had citadels and they would hold people there. So they did in that century at least. But,
okay. Well, it seems to me that a lot of what was done in regards to slavery was in that time was more of a show of kind of mercy, because instead of killing them in warfare, those who surrendered or what have you, they would let them live, but they would take them under their own culture and under their own roof, so to speak, instead of just killing them.
Yeah, and it was even in the Old Testament, God regulated slavery because they were going to have slaves as part of the fallen world. He said, okay, here's the limits. Here's how you treat your slaves, and after 7 years, they could be freed. People don't read that. The critics don't read that part, and they don't read the part where a slave had to be provided for, and beatings were only for negligence or whatever, not doing their duty, and foreigners couldn't be just automatically enslaved. You had to take care of foreigners. It was a society that worked, and there was no slavery by race. They didn't really say a lot in the Bible, at least, about how a person came to slavery, but we do know when the people were in Egypt that even the Egyptians offered themselves to Pharaoh as slaves when they were in the famine, because they had given everything possible to feed themselves, and there was still a famine, and they're like, we got nothing, our lives are in your hands, we'll work for you as slaves rather than die. And so
right, well, and the Bible talks about basically you are a slave to who you are indebted to. And we're slaves right now, but people don't see it because it's not the same. It's not the same type of slavery, that we had against blacks in American history. But it's slavery in the sense that we are indebted to the we are many of us are in debt to the government. Many of us have to work for this government system and for this specific society. We basically make a contract as citizens to be under the rulership of a government. That is slavery, regardless if people want to accept that or not.
Right. We are born into slavery, both directly, ultimately from being children of Adam and Eve, born as slaves to Satan's kingdom, but also slaves to our government with birth certificates and all that, our legal name that is traded on the stock market, and the fact that if we were free people, we wouldn't need licenses from the government for various things, and we wouldn't need to pay taxes. You don't pay taxes if you're free. You don't. It's essentially paying for the right to exist because we're slaves. I mean, they have power over us. They have the power of the sword, and we're slaves, and we don't even realize it because we, are not in a prison cell that we can see. But it's a virtual legal prison nonetheless, and we are powerless in many ways to get out of it, because I would like to see any of these groups of people who think they're going to overthrow it. I don't care if you had 1 billion, 2 billion people on your side. You don't have the technology, you don't have the armies, the weapons, the pervasive spy network that the enemy has, that you're going to successfully overthrow it. It's just being realistic.
And it doesn't matter, because from what I've seen, at least throughout history, is even when a government's overthrown and a new one is erected, same thing ends up happening. People are going to rule over you. It's the result of the fall.
Right.
There's nothing in this fall that we as human beings can fix. That is why we need Christ. That is why we need him to return. So even if they overthrew the government, another one would just rise up and the elite would be over them. But I really like the, I think it's in, I can't even remember what book. God was telling Samuel to warn the people of their desire for a king, saying your desire for a king is going to basically bring you into enslavement to that king.
Right. And yet he worked with them. I mean, even in the millennium,
he gave them what they asked for. Yeah.
Yeah. But he makes something out of it, but he still says it's going to cost you because you asked for something I didn't recommend. Like God is always doing that, working with us where we are and trying to bring us through that to another place, to a better place. But people don't understand sometimes the far-reaching implications of what they ask for. And then they complain they don't get what they ask for sometimes.
Yeah. So can we talk a little bit about human sacrifice? I know that this is something that atheists bring up as well. And they try to, I remember actually when I was an atheist, I didn't have a whole lot of respect for Aron Ra because I had actually busted him, not publicly, but just by watching myself and looking into it and everything. I had actually busted him using a certain passage, and I can't remember what book it was from, but it was talking about basically like the first fruits, offering up your firstborn to the Lord. And he used that passage to suggest that this is human sacrifice. Well, if you look at the context of the passage, and I was an atheist when I did this, when you look at the context of the passage, you could tell that it doesn't have anything to do with human sacrifice. It has to do with committing your firstborn to be in service to the Lord.
Right.
Right. And so I was like, wow, I mean, he really just was dishonest about this. And I seen this as an atheist. I was like, that is unbelievable. Why would you even do that? But one passage that did get me, and I was wondering if it was in regards to human sacrifice, was the, I can't remember. It started with the J, the guy.
Jephthah's daughter.
Yes. So what is your take on that whole story?
what I see is that some people have pointed out that the fact that she went about mourning for several days in the hills with her girlfriends about her, that she would never marry, is telling us that she was just to be kept a perpetual virgin, that she would never have a family of her own, which was pretty much death for a woman in that culture anyway. Not to have a family of her own, not having children was a very big disgrace. And nothing says he actually took a knife to her and killed her or anything like that. I mean, that would have been absolutely forbidden, an abomination to God, to any kind of human sacrifice. And so the fact that she would mourn not being ever having a family, instead of mourning that her life was cut short so soon, it kind of tells you that no, she was not literally killed. That sacrifice, as you pointed out, was not always killing a physical being. It was some other kind of service or bondage of some sort.
Okay, that actually makes sense. So it was almost as if it was kind of the same thing as I was saying a while ago, that he was offering his daughter up for service to the Lord, and thus
Right.
she would not be married. I don't know.
Right.
That's just kind of what I get from what you're saying.
Yeah, and that just seems reasonable.
Her marriage would be so her marriage would be to God instead of man, is kind of what I get from it.
Pretty much. The thing was, it wasn't her choice. It was her father's choice, so he sacrificed her in that respect. There are other people who chose to be single all their lives, and that's commendable. And it's a self-sacrifice. I mean, self-sacrifice is always held up as something lofty, for the greater good or whatever you want to call it. But when somebody sacrifices someone else, that's a bad thing. Okay, now people will come up and say, whoa,
Right.
Wait a minute, God sacrificed Jesus. And I can point you to scriptures that say not only God gave his son, but Jesus sacrificed himself. He laid his own life down. It was his choice. He's God. God only has
Right.
one will. Okay? God, there is no such thing as the wills plural of God. There is one will. And yet there are three distinct persons sharing a will. But Jesus took on humanity at a point in time. This has gone on and on about in Hebrews, starting from the very first chapter. And so the point is that sacrifice of God, of his son, was not like we understand it. I mean, God sacrificed himself, became the son at a point in time as a human, took on human nature alongside divine God nature, and people don't it's such a difficult concept that trips people up on so many levels. But
well, because we can only understand, except those who are in Christ, we can only understand human nature pretty much in the fall.
right. And what trips people up is that what Jesus modeled as a human is for us to emulate, where we submit to God and pray to God and ask God for things. But as God, he was not submitting to himself. That's impossible. God only has one will. And that's why there cannot be a hierarchy in God.
So,
that
kind of just that's really awesome, because when you were talking about the sacrifice and everything, I started to think about the prayer in the garden where Christ actually asked if it were possible for that cup to be removed from him, or something along those lines.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems like the human way, because and I don't think it's not sinful to ask those things, of course,
No.
but it's the human way to ask, Lord, I know that sometimes suffering brings about good things, but please don't let this happen to me.
Right.
Can we do it another way? Yeah. So it's almost as if he was that was his human display right there of
Right.
kind of requesting if there was another way for it to.
Right.
But there wasn't another way. That's the point.
Yeah, he was in mortal flesh, and nobody wants to suffer. I mean, that's a normal,
Right.
rational thing. But as God, yeah. he is, in a sense, talking, he was as a human talking to God, his human nature, where he also had God nature. And he had to model these things for us. We couldn't have seen a lot of things. It's like when he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead, he prayed to God first and said, I'm not saying this because I need to say it. I'm saying it for their benefit, you know?
Right.
So there's a lot that
Right. It seems to him operating in his human nature was to, for our benefit, like you just said, was to show us how to conduct ourselves, and also to show us that he was experiencing what we experience,
Right.
which is suffering. Yeah,
he had to be tempted in every way we are, and had to be made like us, his brothers and sisters, in every way. I mean, how clear can it be? And yet Philippians 2:5-11 says, did not consider his equality with God something to be jealously clung to, but laid it aside and took on the form of a servant, and then was exalted in his human self and went back to where he was, beside God, not beneath him. And so I think that's as clear a passage on the divinity and humanity of Christ as you can find.
It's really,
go ahead.
It's really quite amazing, actually, when people start to realize the beautiful, I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, there's not even words to explain it, but just how beautiful all of this is turning out and is going to end up. I mean, people are only recognizing the negatives in this life, and they're missing out on the amazing things that the Lord does.
Right.
And how he's taking the fall and using it in ways that produces positive things, and eventually is going to wipe it all out. It's just, I don't know. It's just amazing.
Yeah. And that's, again, we come back to trust, knowing God and knowing that we can trust him. And if he would do what he did by taking on human nature like that and doing things for us we could never do for ourselves, I think he wins the prize for a trustworthy deity. You know?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. Well, I mean, he's the only deity.
The true God. Yeah.
Yes, and he's the only one. Even if you count the false gods and you do a comparison, he's the only one that came to redeem humanity. All the other ones, I think somebody was talking about in the side chat the other day, was bringing up a druid god and was talking about how this god sacrificed himself too. And when you asked what he was sacrificed for, he was sacrificed for knowledge. Okay, so all the other ones are, anytime it's a sacrifice resurrection with all these other false religions, it's due to some kind of self-serving for the redemption of humanity and fallen creation.
Right. Or something selfish in that either the God who allegedly did that or the people who believe in it, that they're saying that, it's something other than, you've been tricked and enslaved and I'm going to lift you up regardless of anything you asked for. I'm going to do this because the Bible says while you were still sinners, Christ died for us, and nobody else, no other religion teaches that. And I found, and there's some links I have on Debunking Zeitgeist on my site that go into the fact that a lot of these claims about similarities between the New Testament and other religions were only added in the Middle Ages, long after the New Testament had been written. And people try to, it's called an anachronistic fallacy, where they take those additions out of time and put them before the Bible and try to say, see, the Bible is a copycat religion with the 12 disciples and the Son and this and that and the other. And you find out with investigation and healthy skepticism that that's not true at all.
That's funny. I always took it as, okay, well, so what? Because I know that, they try to say, well, this text was before the biblical text or whatever. And to me, so what does it matter which text comes first? It shouldn't matter which one comports to reality and which one is true, regardless of which one came first. And also if people, if what you're saying is true, that it all was kind of conspired afterwards, I could see that actually happening. By the way, it's not a shocker to me to hear that. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that we're also in all of this so far just going by what's written. And I've had to say many times that we can only go by what's written. And the fact is that an idea can precede all the writings. You know, before anything was written down, there were certainly belief in God. And
Right.
so we can't say when something was written down that that's when that idea arose. So we can't really say which happened first. Now, with the New Testament, we can, because we have so much other evidence to look at, we can determine as with any rational degree of certainty what happened when. But here again, when it comes to the New Testament, we have evidence that these ideas were not borrowed from a previous religion that was written down in any way. And by that time, you know, the 1st century AD, we have a much better picture of what came first.
Right. Well, and also I think, you know, if people start to see the scriptures comporting with reality like I did, I mean, if you start to see that and you look at scriptures tell us that that Satan pretty much presents counterfeits to truth. He twists truth. He presents counterfeits to truth. And sometimes he will use truth. I mean, he used the scriptures to tempt Christ.
Exactly.
So, yeah. And so knowing that, it's not a shocker to me that there's all these counterfeit religions. I mean, it's an obvious, that is what's going to be a result of what the Bible has told us is going to come about, you know, in Satan presenting these counterfeits. He's going to do it to mix people up, to confuse people. God's not the author of sin. Satan is. So he presents all these false religions with similarities just to keep people from the actual truth.
Right. It wouldn't be much of a deception if it was that obvious, you know.
Right. Yeah. So, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, is there anything else you wanted to say about atheism, or any questions in the chat about atheism, or for either of us?
Well, I will put it this way. I do think that atheists, for the most part, and there are some atheists that have been looking into some conspiracies that I see that I want to continue praying for, because they at least are searching for truth. Recognizing that there is a cult and Satanism in the elite, and that's getting them to really question things. And so I just want to say that I think for the majority of atheists, though, is that they do not look into things deeply enough, because if they did look into things deeply enough, that they would see that there is Satanism in our elite is prominent, and it's there. There's no denying it. You can deny it, but you're just in self-denial once you do.
Right.
Because it's just right in front of our faces that these things are taking place and are happening. And when you see that and recognize it and acknowledge it, you see that the scriptures are in fact comporting with reality, and that reality and the scriptures witness of one another. And so that should tell you that the scriptures are reliable and true. And then, you know, there's other things within reality that shows the same, just as real science will present and give you flat earth.
Right.
And, you know, so which comports with scripture as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that atheists tend to ignore the Satanism that is in our entertainment and our elite and everything else. And it's even my own kids could see these things. So, you know.
Yeah, you would think it would be easier to see or admit, but I think it is more of that denial mentality, where just as the atheists will deny that, you know, there's holes in the theory of evolution or something like that, they'll also deny the reality of evil. I remember reading once the account of it's a military prison of some sort, where this person, you know, a soldier, had been deemed insane, and this military psychologists were observing him, and they said they were in the room with him and felt what they called a million-year-old presence. You know, it was more than just this guy was out of his mind. They said he had actually was transforming in front of them. His eyes were reptilian, and they felt this awful ancient presence in the room. And they still said, mentally ill. You know, what can you do with that kind of denial?
Right. And you know what? You're probably, there's probably a movie actually based on that I had seen previewed yesterday. I forgot. It was ODD. I don't know if you're subscribed to him, but he was presenting 33 conspiracy movies, and there was one that was based on the military getting a hold of a specific case of demonic possession. But in this movie, I don't think that I haven't watched it, but from looking at the previews, I don't think that they admit that I think that they go ahead and admit that he's demonically possessed, right? But it might be based off of what you're talking about. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this was something I read years and years ago. I can't even tell you what book it was or anything, or a newsletter or something like that. But yeah, these people were atheists, psychologists, and trying to analyze the guy. And even though they reported accurately what they themselves experienced, they still wouldn't say that there's any such thing as an evil entity like Satan or demons. And that's a level of denial that defies rationality. I mean, when you've got that much evidence staring you in the face, literally and physically, and you know something's going on here that is not just in somebody's head, because you can experience it yourself, then to deny there is such a thing as evil that is external to people, you can't help people like that. They're willingly blind.
Right. Well, and I have watched a movie on Aleister Crowley. I was telling you about that earlier this morning. And I wouldn't advise anybody to watch it because it's filled with sex magic and blasphemy so much that it will make you, if you're a Christian in Christ, you will be ill watching that thing. I mean, it'll make you feel ill. But I do think that it's like in one part there was a student of theology, and then there was a student of science that had met up with Aleister Crowley, and Aleister Crowley turned to the student of science and he said, "Science is the new magic." Mm-hmm. And then later on they talked about how quantum physics was the new alchemy, and it was kind of cool for me to see this in this movie, because I've been considering for quite some time that science, not what we observe and what we can, experiment with and test and things like that, but things such as CERN. I was just suspicious and thinking, is it possible that there are Satanist magicians using witchcraft, using science with their witchcraft? Is this maybe science is being used as magic now? So when I watched this, I was like, oh my goodness, it's saying exactly what I've been thinking lately.
Our family just went out last night to watch the new Pirates movie because some friends wanted to go, and in that movie, one of the main characters, a woman, was accused of witchcraft, and she kept saying, "No, I'm a scientist. I'm an astronomer. I watch the stars. I navigate by the stars. No, I'm not a witch."
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and I know from at least looking at Newton that he practiced alchemy. He was real into alchemy. So I don't know. It's just interesting because I was thinking, that this new technology may be something that they use. And then here I am watching a Aleister Crowley movie and Crowley's saying it. So.
Yeah. Always consider the source.
Yeah, and that's what I find is kind of sad, is that I think that atheists are so deceived, and they don't understand that they're actually working for a side here, and that's Satan's side.
Right. Yeah, I don't know what you can do at that point with anybody who is that blind and deliberately so, denying the evidence that they admit they saw, and just going on and just pushing it away, like just burying their heads in the sand. There's not much you can do for a person like that.
Well, and I had an atheist friend admit to me when I brought up MK Ultra mind control, and I told him, I said, look, I looked into this when I was a Christian before I was an atheist, and I did a lot of, like years of studying that in MK Ultra. And I said, now that I am an atheist, I still can't deny it because I've seen so much evidence of it that it's got to be real. And the guy, that my friend responded, well, it is real. I've seen the documentations on it as well, but they stopped. No, they didn't stop. I mean, okay. When you have people, and that's the thing, they want to think that, okay, maybe some of these things took place, but they stopped doing it. Now, why would they stop doing it if they really did find a way to control people? The military and the elite are not going to stop using those methods.
Right.
It makes no sense that they would stop. Now, the documents stopped. They stopped putting it into the public eye because the public was coming together and forming class action lawsuits against some of these doctors.
Right.
So of course they went underground with it and didn't produce any more public access information on it.
Yeah, it's so naive to think that people that evil who would do those things in the first place would just say, oh, you caught me, I'm done.
Yeah, right. Well, they stopped. No, they didn't stop. Sorry. That's just not, and it's not even logical to think that they would stop. I mean, they were doing it for the purpose of trying to find ways of mind control. And you think that once they found it, they're going to stop?
Yeah, that's denial again. I don't know how people who claim to be rational can do that.
I agree. So there was some conspiracies that I had looked into as an atheist. As a Christian before becoming an atheist, that once I was an atheist, I couldn't deny them. But I remember that I put them in the back of my head. I did not want to talk about them. I did not want to look into them until, any more into them. I did not even want to think about them. So I always put myself into self-denial as well. Up until, the end of my atheist walk. And that's when I started to look into the stuff again.
Right. It's the same thing when they say that evolution only means change, so they don't have to talk about origins. It's denial again, because, and it's also a fallacy called equivocation, because they're saying this is the definition of evolution, but the theory of evolution is an all-encompassing worldview that says everything is by non-intelligent accident, and they can't even say design.
Yes, and that life came from a one-celled organism. Yeah, and this is funny because I talked to the same person, the same friend, my same atheist friend that I've been mentioning all throughout this hangout about this very thing. I as an atheist, I was like, why is it? Because I found it to be a little dishonest. Because I said, why is it that talking TST, I don't want to say the word, but TST is always bringing up evolution and everything. And when a Christian asks them, well, it basically says, well, you guys believe that one species is turned into another. They try to deny that, but that has to be the case if everything came from a one-celled organism. So why are they not addressing that? Why are they denying that? And why are they acting as if that's not evolution when it is?
Right.
And my friend answered, he was like, I don't know, but I do think that I can't remember his exact answer, but I remember that he actually agreed with me on that.
Okay.
Yeah, and that they should be more honest in their approach and say, yeah, we do believe that eventually over all these, and that's how they have to make it work, overall, just like the multiverse, over all these billions of years, yeah, eventually there has to be species that turns into another species if they all came from a one-celled organism.
Yeah, there's no denying that there had to be abiogenesis. There had to be basically saying an unbelievably dense dot of something that came from who knows where, exploded, and no explosion ever since then has resulted in increased order. But here we are. It's or as the saying goes, from goo to you via the zoo. It's just, that's what they believe. That they mock us for saying that everybody, all the people and animals that got off the ark, resulted in what we have now. They mock us for that. But then we could come back and say, you believe we came from pond scum that was struck by lightning. How is your story more
Right.
believable?
Right. Exactly. It's not, and it's even more unbelievable, and it requires more faith and more mental gymnastics, which is something that they actually try to say that Christians do.
Right. It's magic. It's faith.
But I mean,
magic. Yeah.
Yes, and I've come to realize how flawed atheism actually is, and how much of it really takes the imagination for it to even work. Remember, we was having that flat out hangout that one time, and it was somebody who was for the spherical model said something about using your imagination. Well, just use your imagination.
Right. And that's science.
Right. Oh man, I don't know. It's crazy. The deception is rampant, and as Christians, we need to find ways to stand up and nip this in the bud and encourage our youth, our Christian youth, not to fall for these deceptions.
Right, and they're not being trained to do that. They wait till they grow up in a cocoon and then turn them loose and expect everything to be hunky-dory.
Yeah, that's the problem that I see happened with my family structure. I love my family, and I thank them, and I thank God for putting me in my family, because they were very devout Christians. And if it were not for them, I'd probably still be an atheist right now, because they're the ones that instilled knowledge of the scriptures in me. And made me learn that as a child and everything. So if it wasn't for that, those scriptures wouldn't have popped into my head when I was convinced of flat earth. So I really appreciate that. But at the same time, they did not, they sheltered me too much. And so by the time I started getting other worldly information, it really casted a lot of doubt on my faith.
Right. And the thing is, not everybody's a teacher, not everybody's a student, not everybody's an apologist. But if a person knows they don't know something, or it just isn't their thing to be an apologist or a theologian, they should know someone who is, and send whoever they might come across to that person or people. So, because they should know where to find the answers, even if they don't have them themselves. Because I wouldn't expect everybody to have this kind of interest, just as not everybody asks the right questions. They don't ask deeper things. They just have their nose to the grindstone. And I don't condemn people for that. I just say there is so much more to know, and so much deeper and more colorful life can be if you pursue those things. But if you're not going to pursue them, and somebody asks you who is seeking, then you should at least know where to send them. And the churches have failed utterly in that sort of thing.
Yeah, I agree. There was something else I was wanting to say. What was it?
About poorly trained Christians or churches.
Oh, I think a lot of it also has to do with parents really want their children to succeed. And in a way for their children to succeed in this beast system, is what I call it, they pretty much are going to have to regurgitate the information that is fed to them in these school systems and everything like that to even be successful. So I understand the parents' concern as far as not wanting to view human wisdom, worldly wisdom, as horrible or horrific or the enemy or anything like that. But at the same time, you could see it that way and still just tell your kids, look, you don't have to believe what they're telling you to just write it on the test. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I had to tell my kids that I homeschooled, and then eventually they went to public school, charter school. And I said, look, this is the way our society is, and you have to do this, and you have to tell them what they want to hear. But just remember to be skeptical. Ask the right questions.
Right. You don't have to believe what they think is the right answer. Just write the answer down. And another thing too is I think, oh man, I lost my thought again. I'm sorry. I have like a million thoughts running around. I'll think of it in a minute.
Sorry. No problem. I do that. I can be talking and lose my train of thought right in the middle of the sentence. It's just
me too. And I think it's because I always have like a million things going on in my thoughts at once.
Right. Yeah, that's the downside of multitasking. It's like, what was I saying?
I know what I was going to say. You know, we talk about, the scriptures talk about not being, sorry, the scriptures talk about not being of the world, you know, come out of her, be it, you know, don't be of the world and be separate from the world and things like that. And I think a lot of times people get confused on what that actually means. They think that they can't, you know, shop at the store and get GMO foods, and they think that they can't, you know, go out and get a shirt that has Nike on it or that has, you know, it comes from a certain company or something like that. They think that that's what's separating us from the world, but it's actually Christ that separates us from the world. And I, you know, with me, with as much as I know about what's going on and us being poisoned basically in our water and everything, I think a lot of people don't want to look into that, because the truth is there's nothing we can do about it. And so the only thing that we can really do about it is pray and trust that God will protect us from certain things and you know, like the fluoride and the GMOs and stuff like that.
That's why you pray over your food.
Yeah, right. So, you know, the only thing that we can really do is trust God. And that's the good benefit and result of these things are happening, is that it's going to bring you to trust in God more, because you'll realize that there's nothing you could do about it.
Right. I mean, we're in the slave system. It's a terrible place right now, and God knows we're stuck here, and there's only so much we can do. We just do what we can. That's all God expects of anybody, is to do what you're able to do.
Right. So don't fret about tomorrow, and don't fret about the food that you're getting at the grocery store that is filled with GMOs. Just pray over it and trust that the Lord will protect you.
Yep. Do what you can. Responsible for what you know. And now, of course, some people will say, well, the less I know, the better. I'll just remain ignorant, and then I won't be responsible. But that doesn't work. You know?
No, it doesn't, because that can lead you into deception right there. I mean, if the Bible says that my people die of a lack of knowledge, that needs to wake you up. You need to learn these things, because like I was saying earlier, when you avoid the fact that there's evil in the world, you end up becoming someone like a universalist, a full preterist, maybe even an atheist, someone who doesn't see the need for God's judgment.
Right.
And most of the people who come to this mentality are people in first world nations. Go figure.
Yeah. And that's another issue too, with whether it's hierarchy or whatever it is. In underground churches, places like China or other, you know, in Islamic controlled areas where being a Christian can get you killed, they don't have any of that nonsense. There's no hierarchies. There's no knowing your place. There's no any of these silly ideas. It's Jesus died and rose again. I'm trusting God, and everybody hates me because of it, but I believe this to be true, and I'm willing to stake my life on it. And it's a very pure, awesome, you know, authentic religion. And I've been told that some of those people pity us in the West because we have so much danger spiritually. Because when your back's against the wall physically, you get very clear on what you believe, because you have to be. Whereas here, we're comfortable, we have a lot of competing ideas, and it's really a war that you have to fight blind. It's not right in front of you.
Right, and I could see why they would pity us in that regard, because it would be more easily, we would be more easily deceivable if we are not experiencing the suffering and the evil directly and firsthand like they are.
Right, and that's what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was all about, is not that it was a good thing. They were innocent before that. They didn't know good and evil, and it was okay. They remained as innocent children. But once they decided they wanted to know good and evil, then that's where all of this having to experience evil came from. It was their choice, and we are their children. We're born in the system they sold to Satan.
They created, right?
Yeah, and so, but God will make something good of it.
Well, I don't want to say that they created the fall that they created
right.
within the creation. Yeah.
Right. This is just, one of those deeper things, not deeper as in esoteric and hidden, but deeper as in you just got to take the time to think past the surface of things sometimes. People get lazy. They don't want to do that.
Look at the bigger picture. And I think that that's a big flaw with a lot of people, and especially atheists. They tend to not look at the bigger picture of things. Yeah.
Yep. And we all get lazy sometimes, and some subjects just don't interest me. But
yeah,
we at least have to be open and listening to know where God is steering us. And we all have different ways to go, because that's why we're all necessary. We're parts of one body. We each have a function, and we can't do all the other functions.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to admit that there are even some biblical Bible books that don't interest me, and and it's because they're so technical. Like I think it might be Leviticus that goes into all the laws and things like that. So technical that it doesn't keep my interest.
Right.
Not that it's not important, and not that it's not something I should learn, but it is very, very difficult for me to keep my interest in those areas.
Yeah, and like I said, everybody's got different things that God wants them to do, and there's not enough hours in the day to do them all in one person, and that's why we need to cooperate and each one tell what we see out the window we're looking out of, and not try to say everybody should see what I'm seeing, but try to put together a 3D picture out of all the little 1D pictures that each of us has of life or the Bible or whatever it is. Try to put that together into one thing. And that's the cooperation we have to have, and the humility to listen to other people who the Spirit leads where the Spirit chooses, and not try to stuff us all into one mold and have us all be one body part,
Right. Well, I am going to have to go pretty soon. Zach's wanting me for something else again. But I did want to say that, atheists are always, asking us where our evidence is. And I just have to say that the evidence is overwhelming and is everywhere. And reality comports with scripture and vice versa. Right. So anytime you hear an atheist try to suggest that we have no evidence, that is absolute bunk and a lie.
Right.
Throw that out there.
Yeah, I think one thing we can say out of all this is that people are complicated and don't fit into boxes, and it's like trying to stuff a cat into a cage. Sometimes, try to make people see what we see, and we just have to know what's important that we have to see as Christians. There are certain basic, very simple things that we have to agree on, or it isn't Christianity anymore. And that being, of course, that Jesus rose from the dead, and that if we trust him, we're reconciled to God. And people have to understand that it is a reconciliation, a relationship, and certain things flow naturally from that understanding. Because there's so many people who said, I said a prayer and I have my fire insurance ticket now, and they don't understand the relationship part. And then they wonder why things go wrong, and why God seems so distant. But, God speaks to us mostly through each other.
They're not digging in for that. They're not digging in for that communication and closeness with him. So yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. It's more of a, so it's almost like, well, where's your heart at?
Right.
If your heart is just to believe on it, just to save your own hind, and you don't care to get closer to the Lord, I mean, wow. I don't know what to think about that, but I'm sure that's not very pleasing to the Lord. It's like that passage. They profess with their mouth, but their hearts are far from me.
Right. Or having a form of godliness, but denying its power. That's pretty much
Yes.
what I see, coming to the surface again, especially in flat earth, is that people will say, I don't need the Bible. I don't need a book. I don't need this or that or Jesus or anything or the other. I just have my own spirituality. And there's a lot of people calling themselves their name -ism because they're making it up, and they don't have any qualms about it. They're going to make up their own spirituality. And
Following their hearts.
Yeah. And hearts can mislead you.
Mislead, yes.
Yeah, there's a balance between the heart and the mind that I was describing one day as like a ship supposed to have a rudder and a sail and be out on the water. That's how it works when the heart and the mind are working together, when faith and works are working together, whatever. But when a ship is grounded, it has all its parts, but it's stuck in the ground. That's like only the mind, or only the intellect, without the spirit. A ship that is on the water but doesn't have any sails or rudder is like the heart only. It
Right.
won't do what it's supposed to do either. So, but together, that makes it all complete, and it has a purpose and a direction. But
It's interesting.
so when, go ahead.
It's interesting that you say that, because atheists, it's kind of funny. They want to divorce intellect and logic from emotions and the heart. And
Right.
I think that that's extremely flawed. I don't think that, that you can have one without the other. I think that they work together. And I did have a question from somebody the other day in a different hangout, where they asked me, well, do you think that God only communicates through the word? No, I don't. But anytime we get communication from the Lord, and we have certain maybe theories or thoughts that enter into our minds about certain things, we certainly need to make sure that the Bible testifies of it and witnesses of it, and is not contradictory to the word. If it's contradictory to the word, then we could in fact be deceiving ourselves. So we do need to make sure that we have 2 or 3 witnesses for anything that just kind of pops into our mind, or anything that we may think is from the Lord. We need that confirmation that
Right. It says test the spirits, and
right.
There's always the balance, and seeking other people's input, because even though God's a perfect transmitter, we're not perfect receivers. And so we need to communicate, cooperate, be a community. And we will not have, I've heard people say, well, you need a pastor as an authority over you to keep you in line. I'm like, no, we need the Holy Spirit, and all of us need each other. This is not a hierarchy thing again, because hierarchies have done more damage to the body of Christ than any other organic or spontaneous group of believers where 2 or 3 gather. Because all you have to do then, and Satan knows this full well, if you have a hierarchy, all you have to do is control the people at the top, and you control the masses. And so if the people at the top are compromised.
And that's exactly what's going on in the world. Yep.
Exactly. So I just wish people could get past that mindset that somehow an authority of a human origin is going to save us. We have the Holy Spirit. We have the Bible.
The authority is the Holy Spirit. That's right. And that's that almost goes back to that, I don't know how you worded it, because you worded it exactly, I think, how the scriptures worded it, but having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. That's the same thing. To think that we have the Holy Spirit, but that the Holy Spirit is incapable of being our guide and our authority, that is denying the power of God.
Right. Right. It's trying to be usurping the place of Christ and the Holy Spirit in our lives. It's anytime somebody sets up a worldly chain, they're setting up their chain itself talks about, bonding people, in bondage, keeping people in bondage, because the Holy Spirit, the truth, sets us free. And we're free not to sin, but from sin, as Paul made it clear. We don't have a license to sin, but a hierarchy won't save anyone from error. What will save them is an honest look at the Bible and having the assurance of salvation by knowing it's a relationship. And then, let people be. I mean, if you're concerned about what somebody believes, take them aside privately and talk to them about it and try to convince them. But in the end, you can't force anything down their throat, because not even God would do that.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to have to get off here. Zachary's wanting something. He's been wanting something for a few minutes, so I better do it before he ends up with a meltdown or something. So,
well, we've been at this almost 3 hours. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. I really appreciate you doing this. This was an awesome talk, and I'm hoping we can do more of these. They were asking in the chat about a regular kind of a online church service, and I'd be happy to run the hangout. And they're thinking maybe evenings in the Eastern time zone, at least for me. I'm thinking maybe a Tuesday evening would be a good time for me to have a regular hangout, if that's okay with people. Go ahead.
Tuesday is good for me as well. Wednesdays I have his behavioral therapist, so that's a no-go for me.
Okay. And I know there's other channels.
Hold on, let me see something here.
Sundays and Mondays and Wednesdays.
Oh, I do think. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I do have meetings on Tuesdays, but it's only once a month, and it's with my boss. But it's only like once a month, so.
Okay, well, maybe
problem.
we'll shoot for that, because I know I think I'm going to be busy on Wednesdays if I get the church thing going.
Tuesday doesn't work for me, Paulie. You'll have to make another day.
Oh, sorry. Wow, that just got shot down, didn't it? But thanks again, Eve, and we'll have to do this again sometime.
Oh, yeah, I would too. And I wouldn't mind doing kind of a series type of thing as well on this.
Cool. We can get more people
in
involved.
to atheism.
All right.
Yeah. Great. Sounds great to me.
You have a good day.
All right. You guys as well. Bye, audience. Thank you for listening. And thanks for having me on, Paula.
No problem at all. You're very welcome. We'll see ya.
See ya.
So what's going on, GB Troll?
I was just wondering about the Book of Thomas.
Oh. What book is that?
I don't know. Did they find that in the Dead Sea?
If they found a book in the Dead Sea, I'm kind of wondering if it would be readable anymore.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah.
So what about the Dead Sea Scrolls? Sorry, I'm eating ice cream.
Sounds yummy. Well, they were, of course, discovered in 1948, we are told, by a shepherd boy, we are told, and contained many thousands of documents and fragments of documents in jar clays. And these are all have been carefully extracted and digitized, so everybody can read them without destroying the originals, that sort of thing. And they are mostly from a community of people called Essenes that were very frugal, denying the body kind of community that lived out in the desert and around near the Dead Sea. That's why they're called the Dead Sea Scrolls. Not that they were in the water, but in caves nearby. And they had at one point they buried all their documents that they could because they were about to be destroyed or whatever, or run off. And that's why we have those. And there's a lot more there than just Bible stuff. There's a lot about how their daily lives were. But there was also a copy of the full text of the book of Isaiah, which was 1,000 years older than the previous earliest document available. And yet it was very much the same. And so there's a lot of biblical content there, but it certainly doesn't disprove the Bible in any way.
So how did the Anunnaki fit into this?
they don't fit into the Bible at all as that name. There are
Well, I
Anakim.
mean, they were in the Dead Sea Scrolls, no? The story of Enki and Lil.
No, I think that is the Sumerian texts that have that stuff, not the Dead Sea Scrolls, if I'm not mistaken. I think you're thinking of the Sumerian documents, but those were not in Qumran. Qumran is the case.
Who are these crank callers?
Oh, man, just never stops. You're so popular.
Crank caller. Oh, it's your friend Brian.
Oh, man.
If he's listening, I'll be there in a sec. Yeah. So well, the story of Enki and Lil. I did go through most of those, and I read about that whole the other creation story, Bible version 0.1, whatever you want to call it. Very detailed, very mirror-esque to, I guess, the Bible story in a lot of ways too. But it was in just some ways, but it was creation of clay jars, all that stuff, trial and error of genetic engineering. How could all of that stuff be spoken of thousands of years ago? Genetic engineering and everything.
Yeah. I know one possible story is that's becoming popular is that history really isn't that long. Another is that history goes in cycles. And so history could be very, very long, but it keeps repeating itself like a skipped record. And yet another is the one that I would more ascribe to is that I take the Bible's account of things, and that things that are original ideas got changed and lost and twisted as time went on and people scattered. And that there were several choke points in history, one being the flood, another being the Tower of Babel, where people, as they split apart into different ethnic groups or whatever, would take the story's original truths with them, and these would get changed in time. And then by the time the Bible was written down, that half the reason it was written is to correct them back to their originals. That's just the way. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Interesting. To me, it's like I don't know what story to go with.
Well,
there's so many stories.
I know, but I'm
the science-minded type, so I like the Anunnaki one. Oh, that was good ice cream.
Never seems to do that to me.
I shouldn't smoke a cigarette while I'm eating ice cream, maybe.
No. Poor ice cream.
John Travolta did it, and I want to be.
Wow, you don't want to be like him. Scientologist and all, but now I forgot what I was going to say. What was I going to say?
Story to go with.
What's that?
What I was talking about. I don't know what story to go with.
Oh, yeah. What it all boils
story.
down to for me is that we have as much reason to believe that the New Testament account of Jesus is accurate as we have to believe anything at any time. And because I believe what he did was true, that he died and rose again, I'm going with that story. I have something to go on to choose.
I think the science-minded like the Anunnaki creation story because it makes scientific sense. It's kind of cut and dry for the most part. Besides knowing the specific genetics, the details of genetic engineering, it's very scientifically minded, cut and dry, kind of like a master-slave thing, in a way. It's they're up there, we're down here. We can see things up there, that adds validity to a story when you can see things. And so that was the one I liked. But as soon as David Wilcock's forehead and the others started talking about it on Ancient Aliens, I'm like, I don't know anymore.
Yeah, as far as science goes, I mean, as you've observed too, the world seems to have endured a flood. It seems to be intelligently designed. Science is rather limited in that it has to observe things in the present, and it can only speculate on the past based on what it sees in the present. But there are other things that are not as hard science, but scientific nonetheless, where we have tried and true methods of examining documents, for example, and ancient writings that are very much scientific kind of principles. It's not like you can put them under microscopes, although you can do that with materials and so forth, but it's a lot of sleuthing. It's a lot of investigation, and that's a big part of science anyway. I mean, technically, the scientific method is just observe and repeat, but it takes sleuthing and thinking and logic, things that are not science, to make use of that information. And that's all we're doing when we talk about evidence for the Bible and for Jesus and all that. If we're talking about a lot of documents, that isn't necessarily unscientific in a way that nothing else is unscientific, because you have to use logic and things that you can't quantify to analyze the data that you have. You know what I'm saying?
It just seems like more stretches in the Bible for like staffs turning into snakes, seas parting, pillars of salt turning the stone. Although I do think there's something to the turning the stone thing. Like if I can maybe work on that part too. Like if the Bible's true, I like to try to prove it true in the real world with tangible evidence. So if the petrified trees thing, there's something to it, there's your turning to stone kind of, also kind of coincides with the Medusa story. I mean, we might have a lot of intermingling of stories here, especially if history's getting rewritten and
well, if that's true, then everything's getting rewritten, including all our evidence, and then where are you? But as far as ridiculous stories go, I know we've talked about this before. I'll put the Bible's ridiculous stories against anybody else's any day of the week, because I can find ridiculous stories in just about every other story that people have come up with.
Yeah. So. And I see that more and more. Like people, like they throw stones at the Christians and well, what do you believe? Helios. Like, it's to me, the Big Bang is two things. It's religious based, because you have to have faith, and there's no science to prove it. And I also think the Big Bang is a theory still, because they're waiting to see if we cause it. So we'll do something to cause the Big Bang. That's why it's a theory. And evolution is a theory because they're waiting to see if we evolve.
Right. And they have tried things like the fruit fly experiment that we've all heard about, where they try, because fruit flies multiply so rapidly and go through so many generations, that they could introduce mutations and see if it turned into something else. But all they ever got was mutated fruit flies. They were still fruit flies, identifiable as fruit flies. They never turned into horse flies or house flies or super flies or anything, dragonflies. They stayed fruit flies, and they could not make them evolve. And it was an utter failure. So it's a circular argument anyway, just like science, can only observe and repeat. But when they try to say that their conclusion they're trying to draw, which is evolution, they have to start with that as a premise and put those glasses on when they do their investigation, because it's impossible not to interpret what you see. I mean, that's the purpose of the observation, is so later you can interpret it. But that interpretation part is not the science part, because you can't observe an interpretation.
The closest thing I ever heard to proof of evolution, and go back to David Wilcock again, he was talking about some type of, I want to say it was an X-ray beam or something, and it was talking about chickens. And I don't know if the beam went through the egg or went through the hen, like where it lays the egg. So, as the egg is forming. But I think it was the egg. I don't know if anybody in the chat has heard David talk about this, but he's basically, I want to say it was an X-ray, but could be gamma ray. It's something very high up, ultraviolet rays maybe. And it pierces through the egg. No, I know what it was. It goes through one species and then into like the egg of a chicken. So, and then what hatches out of that chicken's egg is the other species.
What's this again?
Like, what? Yeah, it was something David Wilcock was talking about, and it said it was an experiment that was done. I want to say it was tortoises and chickens it was done with. And the beam, the X-ray or the ultraviolet beam, passed through the turtle to the chicken egg. And then I don't know how long they did this for, but then what would hatch out of the chicken egg was a turtle. So I'm
I've
like,
never heard of that.
wow. I'm like, if that's true, maybe there was some kind of galactic event that happens once every whatever 26,000 years that causes the sun's rays to pass through everybody.
This is
There's some kind of weird species jump that happens.
this is essentially a theory made up years ago by a guy named Stephen J. Gould, called the hopeful monster theory, or the formal name is punctuated equilibrium. In other words, they realized that slow, gradual change doesn't work. Classic evolution theory doesn't work. So they had to fix it. And so he tried to come up with this hopeful monster theory, or also another one, a variant called the jumping gene theory, which is both of those kind of sound like what you were describing, where evolution doesn't work. So every once in a while, we have to have a sudden catastrophe that accounts for the fossil record. And because everything in evolution depends on the fossil record, pretty much. They can talk about bacteria evolving, quote unquote, but what really happens, like with bacterial resistance, is that some bacteria already have resistance to a drug. And so when you use that drug, all the non-resistant bacteria die off, and so everything left is the bacteria that was already resistant, so it has no competition, so it multiplies, and they get these superbugs. That's not evolution. That's just man's stupidity killing off the competition so that one bacteria that they don't have a drug for flourishes. And so I don't see any evidence of evolution, even through mutation or anything like that, because if you keep mutating, all you get is the same mutated creature. Now, you're saying that didn't happen. Stephen Jay Gould's theory was purely speculation because he had no experiment. But I would like to see a lot more evidence and repetition of this experiment under conditions where ordinary people like us can verify it. Plus, it still wouldn't prove that it happened ever in the past.
Right.
It still took an intelligent experiment to make it happen, and we can't say that this ever happened in the past.
And the only thing that even looks remotely like an evolutionary jump to me would be a caterpillar to a butterfly.
Yeah, and even that, it's still the same creature. It's the same genetics. It just changes form, which is not turning into a new species. I mean, we recognize it's just the larval form of the butterfly, So even that isn't evolution. It never turns into something it's not. Well,
if I'm walking really slow and then I can fly a million times faster, that's evolving.
Yeah. If you could suddenly flap your arms and go, that'd be something.
But it could, for all I know, that this could be a species parasitic thing, some kind of a Morgellons infecting the caterpillar and mutating, and then binary species, the butterfly comes out of it. For all I know, that's what it could be. For all we know, we don't know.
What could be is endless speculation. I mean, that's what we've been fighting against with NASA and Big Bang and all that, is their stories. That everybody can make up a story that might cover what we can see, and it can sound plausible, like a good plot of a movie, but that doesn't make it true.
It just sucks that we got to go through all this all over again to verify it.
Right. And like I said, if I'm going to believe in something by faith, and everybody believes something by faith, I'm going to pick something that I at least have another thing that I can see or reason out to go on. That's how I would define a faith that isn't blind. So, like I said, when it comes to something that happened in the past, Jesus rising from the dead, I think there's plenty of evidence, rational evidence, for this historical event. And we have our own personal experiences, the experiences with others. And I take the whole thing holistically as a collection of evidences and go by that and just try to weigh everything, And it's not like I haven't tried to look at other ideas. I mean,
and I can tell you from firsthand experience, as a guy with long hair and a beard, I have paid for the sins of man. many, many times. So that part's true.
There you go.
Yeah, it's just.
But it'd be nice to have absolute certainty, but in this realm, I don't think we're going to get it. All you can do is probability, and I think Jesus is the most probable explanation, and the Bible's the most probable account in my estimation and studies.
Flat Water or Flat Earth had a video out a few days ago maybe, going through a whole bunch of articles about the giants. And that's another good one to confirm something in the Bible. Let's prove the giants were real. And I think the dinosaur thing is the cover-up for the giants.
Could be. But one thing I always try to ask is, be skeptical. One thing like the Mud Fossils channel or the Truth is Stranger Than Fiction that kind of works with them, the Mud Fossils guy is saying that instead of trees, these things show evidence of being body parts of giants, like somebody's ankle and foot, and here's this tendon and that blood vessel. And what I get, he'll take pictures of mountain ranges, and if you turn it sideways, it looks like the profile of a face. It really does. And there's a lot of them. But my question then, looking to be the skeptic, is why do all these giants die facing straight up? And where's the rest of their body? I mean, we got a head here. Where's the rest of it? And why did they die facing straight up from the ground? You have to turn every one of those mountain ranges pictures sideways to see the face.
Yeah, I mean, what's that called? Pareidolia?
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, and so even though it's uncanny how many of them look like faces, the fact is that would mean that all these giants died facing straight up so they could have a nice profile
and they were
shot.
so big, we're literally a nice tab size to them.
It becomes absurd after a while. And then the thing is also with the trees or anything else, it's like, okay, where's the rest of it? And how does this really prove anything when one person says it's a tree, other person says it's a human or a giant of some sort, a living, moving being? And for example, with the trees, why did they leave the stumps? Didn't they have stump pullers?
Well, we leave stumps all the time. We cut down trees, we leave the stumps. The inner part of the stump rots out, leaves the ring. That's all that's left. The outer ring.
Right, but apparently the giants could, cut down all the trees, and we have no evidence of what they did with these giant logs.
Well, they moved them to another. If they were here and they did take down the trees, they brought it back to their home base or wherever they came from. They like anything that invaded here, obviously had to invade because of their lack of resources, I would imagine, or they're just parasites that consume and move on or whatever. So it's got to be something like their home wasn't good enough or for their needs or their wants.
See, here again, we have a story. It's just a story. It's just like with the, ball earth model versus flat earth. Everybody's got a story of what could be, could have been, might be.
Everybody's got a special kind of story. Everybody needs that time to shine. It don't matter what you got. Not a lot. So what? They'll have theirs, you'll have yours, and I'll have mine. And together we'll be fine.
And in the end, it's all a matter each person has to choose by some degree of faith what they're going to believe. And that it always comes back to that. Hey, Brian? Talking?
He's working on that.
The mic problem. Always the mic problem.
Yeah. I'm going to invest in a $4 mic for him.
Twice before I come in every time. So.
Excuses.
I'm going to super chat you a mic, but I'm going to have to give you 30% more because Google takes a rake.
Account. It's my Google account. Every time it does an update or anything like that, automatically my mic settings just go nuts. And then a day or two after, I find the fix, or they have the fix. Either way,
it's because Google is taking 30% of your bandwidth.
Right.
You want 30% of everything.
Now, you guys are talking about kind of like the Giants thing and all that. You know, I've come across like a similar kind of thing that would explain all of that in a way. I've been running across how a lot of stuff in nature and man and all these things are naturally made a certain way. It seems like, you know what I'm saying? Like, for instance, Jimmy, we were talking about that one time with the top of the stumps, or you want to say the mountains, where they have all that. It looks like not rings, but those forms. You know what I'm talking about? Those little octagon things, like in cells. Okay, I saw that. But I was also looking at, like, you know, maybe we've been on a playing field that's been wiped out many, 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 many times. And that he starts out using the same type of chemistry. So it would look similar, like you'd say the mud fossil guy saying, these are all this, these are all that. Maybe we've all been made similar, but that wasn't what we're not. It might not be a giant, but it's something else that's a mountain now. But I'm just saying, you know, who's to say that it was a giant? You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying that when you look in history, or you look at all the things that have been made here and there, there's a similarity there. And being that's there, we don't know how far back we go. We don't know how many times they started over. You know what I mean? Or God.
Well, that's the thing, is even if we don't consider the Mandela effect, which everybody knows I don't believe in anyway, we don't know what happened before the flood, the way things were. And
right,
the flood
right.
is as good an explanation of what we see as anything. It is the story I accept, that this accounts for what we see. The flood can account for it.
The flood is like, when we talk about history about the flood, you're talking about history from that point.
Right, but we really don't know what the pre-flood world was like.
Right.
And there's so much evidence of, you know, and the purpose of the flood was to wipe out everything, and what we have are ruins and things that we find under the ocean that are clearly man-made, or, you know, technological, or we find gears, we even find chariot wheels and axles in the Red Sea that was covered over by by God when the people of Israel went over on dry land, and then the flood water, you know, the waters came over them, over the Egyptian army. And we find all sorts of things that would fit a flood, a worldwide flood. And so I can't say that there's anything that would say that the Bible story is ruled out.
Right.
And we can't also rule out other stories. But here again, we're going to come down to faith sooner or later, and choosing a story we think is most rational. And I think the Bible's version of things is most rational, and somebody else is going to,
That's the difference right there, what you just said. You know, what you think your definition of the story might differ from ours. I'm not trying to jump on you and, you know what I mean, put a wedge there. I'm just saying, you know, some of us, we all look at things different. Hopefully we all look at it differently in the same type of light.
Right. And what I'm going to say is just that if we could all stop with the, you know, on people on all sides of this, not us in this room necessarily, but when people get mad at somebody else and say, why can't you see this? It's so obvious. You must be blind or stupid or a shill because you don't see what I see. When in fact, there's multiple ways to see it. And we all, in the end, like I said, we just, by faith, we pick the one we like. That's what we do.
Yeah.
Do we have to choose?
Right, Jimmy. Yeah.
That's up to you. Some people don't choose. They just do the 9-to-5 thing and never think about it, and it never bothers them.
Well, I mean, I want to think about it. I just don't want to make, like, is that your final answer? Like, I don't have a final answer yet. Like, I'm still asking questions and trying to answer them.
Right.
But no final answer. I don't
Well,
feel like I should have a final answer yet.
Well, this realm is not the realm of final answers, in my opinion. You know, I'm going with probabilities, but because of the probabilities and the way I go about, I have chosen by faith to go about investigating the world and what I believe to be true about the next life. I believe that Jesus rose from the dead, and if I, trust him, then I will be with my Creator for eternity. And I would encourage everyone to make the same choice because it's working out for me, working out for a lot of people, and I can't see any downside to it. I can't say that I'm infallible and that I absolutely know the truth. I could be wrong about everything, but there comes a point of absurdity where you can speculate so endlessly that it drives you crazy. You got to stop somewhere, I think.
Yeah, this ain't the end. I really don't believe that. I think that if it was the end, like some people think, I think we'd be all be the same. If you understand what I mean by that thought. We're all different, and we're all here for a certain amount of time, and I think we carry on. That's, what I mean.
Is there a set number of souls?
That's another question there. You know what I'm saying?
What do you mean?
He's wondering, is there a limit on how many souls can be occupied
Like,
here?
are there, like, say, 1 trillion souls, and we're just kind of trickling down here from the heaven realm?
All I know is that the only
Where are the
reference
souls
to a
coming
number.
from? That's a good point.
Well, there's 2 questions there. The first one is number of souls. There's one reference in the Bible to a number of souls, and it's Paul is writing and saying that God has hardened the hearts of the people of Israel until the full number of Gentiles has come in. And it's the wording in Greek is like a ship's complement, the number of people required to get a ship out to sea.
Gotcha.
That's the idea of the number of Gentiles that have to be saved until God will come back and finish what he has, the business.
So yes, Jimmy, there is a number. There is a
number.
Infinite number there.
But
yes,
as far as where souls come from, where and when they originate, nobody can say beyond the fact that the Bible says in the Old Testament, for example, before I was in the womb, you knew me. Talking to God, David is talking to God. Says, before I was in the womb, you knew me, and you knit me together in my mother's womb. So it's talking about the pre-existence of the soul in some way. Whether it's just foreknowledge or not could be argued, but I believe, and I can't prove, that a soul is created by God as soon as a zygote is formed, the zygote being the meaning of sperm and egg, that there is a soul attached. But then it gets complicated, because what if you have conjoined twins? There was one egg, and something went wrong and it split in 2. Do you have 2 souls? I've seen a documentary of this girl walking around that has 2 heads.
Yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah, I saw that before too. Yeah,
and they're 2 different people. They're very much attached.
Think about that one, Jimmy. Think about that one.
Okay, so what happened then is the souls merged from a solar flare, and the souls merged, and now it has to be born like that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know, and nobody knows.
I think that's strictly biological.
Yeah, and all I can say, as far as the impact it would have for a Christian, is on the question of abortion, whether a baby is alive or not. And I'm like, if it takes us, if death is defined by a stopped heart, then life is defined by a started heart. And so if the baby has a heartbeat, if there is a heart beating in that mother's womb, that baby is alive, and it's a human by genetics. And
the sperm has a heart.
Not as a beating heart.
If you break down and look at a sperm, it's got a...
Well, every cell can be said to have a heart by that.
Exactly.
But what I mean by a heart is a heartbeat.
Gotcha.
Okay. And that, because death isn't defined by one of your cells in your body dying. Death is defined by your heart circulating blood dying. Okay. Right. By its...
The technical term. Gotcha.
Right. So medically, if you're dead because your heart stopped, then you're dead. You're alive because your heart started. So I believe that the soul is attached to the body. Wherever it was before that, I don't know. But the soul was attached to that body when the heart began to beat. And so anything aborted after that point is murder.
Gotcha.
And the heart starts beating. I don't remember exactly, but it's very early in the pregnancy. So
there's something to that, because, all through my life until I was 16, I did not know I had a twin, but I knew there was something missing. My parents aborted my twin when they were like 3 or 4 or 5 months along. They thought that there was only one. So they aborted because of complications that they said that was going to happen with my mom and the kid. So they made a decision to abort. They aborted. A few months later, my mom's still getting bigger. They check her again, find out she's still pregnant. This time she feels really bad for what she did. And no matter what the doctors say, she says she's keeping it. So I'm kind of, I'm tossed up with the abortion thing, because I feel that you shouldn't be able to kill a life. And at the same time, there's certain circumstances that I don't know. I don't know how to even put it. I don't even know how to put it.
There's something called an ectopic pregnancy. I can't even say it. Where instead of implanting in the placenta, the fertilized egg implants in the fallopian tubes.
Right.
And that's definitely a baby, but I don't know that it has a heartbeat at that point. But you have to abort, because otherwise it will kill.
Medically necessary, yes.
Yeah, it will kill the mother. And so somebody's going to die either way.
They're going to come to you, or both. That's what they told my mom. They told my mom that. Well, and here's the glitch there. Okay, they told my mom that she was going to die and the kid was going to die. So they decided to abort. When I came along and they decided to keep us, or keep me, she didn't die, or I didn't die. So what they did at first, was it technically true, or you know what I mean by that?
Well, it's about intent once again. If they know that they're aborting a living, beating heart, then I think that's a deliberately taking a life, unless they knew the mother's life was in danger. Absolutely.
But that's what I'm saying. They thought.
Yeah. Well, they thought. Well, they didn't know. They thought it was in danger, and humans.
That's my point right there.
Yeah, humans make mistakes. I don't think God would hold you accountable for that. Yeah, I don't think they would hold her accountable for that either.
Oh, she felt bad for years.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, as a mother, you would probably never completely forgive yourself. Yeah.
And the weird thing was, the way I found out was when I was like 15 or 16. I don't remember exactly the age, but I got into a fight with my dad. He got on one of his drunk sprees. You know, he's sober now, okay? But back then, 20, 30 years ago, he was a drunk. And I don't mean just a drunk. I mean, he woke up drinking, went to sleep drinking, and for years he doesn't remember. Okay, you know what I mean? So anyway.
No, that's a drunk.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm getting at. We got into a fight, and when I said I was moving out, he decided to lay this on me. And when he did, I thought, oh, he's just a drunken old man. You know what I mean? Being stupid. That's what I really thought. So I left. 3 days later, I show up at my mom's house. Now, my mom and my dad haven't spoken in 15 years. Literally no speaking, no nothing. She spills the guts. So she's confirming the other side of the story within 3 days. What's the odds of that? You know what I mean? It's just weird how it all happened.
Timing is a big part of it being the mysteries of life, I think. Or something about timing, and not just, and that's what I was talking about with Teal earlier, was that God doesn't instantly right every social wrong, because some terrible harm comes if we do things too fast sometimes. And that's why we're like salt and light. We're supposed to be, as Christians, we're supposed to slowly, one person at a time, change the world. Not by storming the castle with pitchforks and torches, but by being the people that we're supposed to be and spreading the message we're supposed to spread.
So it slowly changes.
Yeah. Because it's too harsh to do it all at once. And why it is, I don't know. It's just how it is.
Now, from the Bible, what does it state with people that are aborted? Does it state anything along that lines of babies or infants that are cut short term? Does it say anything about their souls?
There is a passage in Romans where Paul talks about those who have died who did not sin as Adam. Because death entered the world, and they're born mortal. We are all mortal, meaning able to die. And some people die before they've even committed a sin. So they're not dying because they personally sinned. They died because there's sin in the world. And as far as where their souls go, we know from the Bible that God is merciful and doesn't want anyone to perish, and that people who are sent to hell are only sent because they rebel against God and don't want to spend eternity with him, and he sends them there reluctantly and because they have decided to reject him. Well, babies can't do that. The mentally disabled cannot do that. Those who are emotionally crippled can't do that. It's God's call. I mean, we're not going to sit here and know the mind of God and how he will judge each individual case. But
Right.
I am absolutely certain, because of what I do know about God, that he would not send any soul to hell unless they knowingly defied him and didn't want to be with him.
Now, what about
No,
the people that put him there? Go ahead, Jimmy.
knowingly defying him, I think, will require more than just having a belief. It would require knowing, like, all of it, all of the Bible is true and Jesus died for our sins, true, like not believing it, but knowing it, then defying it. That I can see. But when we're all under a witchcraft, talisman, sigil spell, that
Like, I gotcha.
we
With
can't
what's
even
going
be
on.
sure if we're man or a woman anymore, like, I think this God would be a little lenient.
On some of us, you mean?
Well, listen, it says God is not willing that anyone perish, but that all come to repentance, and he just takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. He's just, he's saying that exact thing. He's saying that God will have mercy. He knows whether somebody's unable or doesn't know or is in a toxic environment. And all I know is that I'm going to tell everybody that they should be reconciled to God, if for no other reason than there's an extra super awesome, unimaginable benefits for doing so. But my motive for saying that is that I would like to share what I have and what other people have found by having this relationship, and let God worry about the fate of an eternal soul, and try to encourage everybody at least to consider the claims that Jesus rose from the dead and that there's something really good about accepting it. Not that they should accept it in spite of what evidence is, but because of it. And I think it's rational. But I also think it's the deepest spirituality, because a lot of times, I talk as an analytical type, that I may come across as this is all intellectual, but it's not. It's a relationship, and it is that part of Christianity that has been so de-emphasized that people don't think of Christianity as spiritual, and that's our own fault. But it is, and there are plenty of people who would tell you about their experiences and how, even sometimes that God appeared to them in some way, or,
What about experiences like this? Okay, remember I just told you about what happened with my twin. Okay, now later on in life, I had a couple experiences where I had my one brother who died. Okay, we didn't know he died. I had a dream one night after a big blowout happened when we were in Arizona. Let me give you a little backstory real quick. My stepmom's sister won the Arizona State Lottery for a bunch of millions of dollars, and we moved in with she died of a brain aneurysm 3 months later. We had her. So my stepmom was
so
her.
my luck.
Yeah. Okay. Her son was my stepmom's nephew. Okay. So anyway, so we had to go there, take care of him, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they had a big blowout one night, and she tries to kill me and my sister, blah, blah, blah. Cops come, take her away, and my dad says, you guys got to get some sleep because we're moving in the morning. We're out of here, So that's what the plan was, went to sleep. Had a dream that night. My brother came to me, turned around and told me that he's not going to see me no more, not ever again like it used to be, so on and so on and so on and so on. Tell everybody I said bye, and I woke up, or in my dream, I was like, no, what are you talking about? I'll see you sometime. I know right now you just have bad times, and then I woke up. Went and told my dad what happened. He listened to the whole story, then said, just go back to sleep. We got a lot of stuff to do. Never mind the dream. A week later, we're in Michigan, unpacking. We get a phone call. It's the Honolulu City Morgue stating they got my brother there, and he died on so-and-so date, which was the same time and date as when I went to sleep that night.
Wow.
So I'm kind of confused with the whole, how people try to tell me that when somebody comes to you and talks to you like it's your family, that it's demons. Okay, I get that. I get that somebody can take over and understand everything that they knew, and they can take that form or whatever. I understand that. But what I'm confused on is what I just told you on right when it happened, or did it happen when it happened? What I mean is, did my brother die and then something else took the entity, came to me, told me that? Or was he able to tell me at that moment what was going on? You know what I mean?
I don't know, but I don't discount. I mean, I would not in any way think that there was a malevolent force involved in that, because it wasn't like they were trying to teach you something bad or lead you astray. Or
no, but what can that do
yeah.
to the mind? That can tell me that I can talk to people on the other side. That's why I'm confused on this, is because we all know that the devil can use good for his bad things in a way. Okay.
Yeah, but sometimes God will tell people things in advance, and whether it was actually your brother's soul or that God gave you a vision of your brother saying these things, I don't.
Right. I don't know. That's where I'm stuck.
Yeah, I don't know. But one way or another, you were told. Why you were told is another question, because a lot of people, decent, godly people, were never told anything. It's a total shock when they find out.
Oh, when I answered the phone call, and then they asked to speak to my father, and I said, my dad's not here. At the time we were in Detroit. I'm up north right now, but at the time we were in Detroit, and we were looking for a place. We just been here a week, or just got here pretty much, and he wasn't there. So anyway, I had to give him the number where he was at. And when he called later on, right after he hung up with them, he called me back. It's like, do you remember having that dream? He's the one that brought it up. And I'm like, yeah, what do you, then it recalled to me, or it reminded me, whoa, I did have that dream. You know what I mean? It's
right.
So at that point, I realized it wasn't just me. Okay. You know what I mean?
Right.
I had expressed something that had happened, and then later on it happened, and now you can confirm it. So it's, it's a lot of people think if it's just in your head or not, you know what I mean? And that I can confirm it wasn't, you know what I mean?
Right. It wasn't you hallucinating or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah. So here again, I can't tell you exactly technically if it was your brother's soul or if anybody's soul actually communicates with the living before they move on. I don't know
There
that.
anything in the Bible where there's any kind of stories to where somebody showed up?
Well, there is one in the Old Testament. It was a little unique situation, though, because the first king of Israel, what God told them, don't ask for a king, he's going to oppress you, and they asked for one anyway. So they chose Saul, and Saul turned out to be bad. And so at one point, God had stopped talking to him anymore. And so he said, I'm going to go see a medium. He knew he shouldn't have done that. So he goes to this medium and says, I want you to bring up the soul of the prophet Samuel or something, or not prophet Samuel. It might have been, I forget which prophet. But he says, I want you to bring this guy up to the dead for me and talk to me, because God won't talk to me anymore. And so the medium starts to do her thing. She was incidentally, Jibby, called the witch at Endor. Where did Lucas get that name? Anyway, this is where she was in Endor, and she was a witch, and she conjured. She went to do her usual conjuring thing, but she screamed because, unlike every other time she had conjured somebody, this was really the guy she was trying to bring up. In other words, it had never happened before. It was always a fake or a demon, and this time it was really that person. And she was totally frightened out of her mind. And what this person said then was, Saul, you're bad. You shouldn't have done this. Why'd you wake me up? Bad things are going to happen to you. The kingdom is taken from you and blah, blah, blah. So what that tells me is that the dead can appear to the living, but it's extremely rare. And it doesn't, and that was before Christ, of course, too. So the way the abode of the dead was not the same then as it is now, especially the righteous dead. And so I can't say how it is now, whether anyone would come back. Now, we do have in the New Testament, again, before Jesus actually died, we had the account of the transfiguration where Jesus goes up on the mountain with this inner circle and suddenly transforms into this light being, and there with him are recognized Abraham, or Abraham and Moses or something like that, and they were really there, physically could be seen, and then they disappeared. Jesus went back to normal. So there are times when the dead can return to the living momentarily. So I wouldn't rule out anything, except that in your case, as you describe it, I don't think it sounds evil at all was involved. I don't, because nothing was said. It's not like those alien abductions where they tell people to work for world peace and that so many people have to die and such,
Right, right.
I got a funny story like that too. My heart stopped at 8 years old, and I saw the light, the tunnel, the whole thing, except this tunnel was more like a swirl. It reminded me of like a galaxy sky spiral. It was like a swirling cloud in the sky with a very bright light at the end of it, like piercingly bright like the sun. And there were people at different distances away from me, at different, say, heights, because I'm like standing at the end of this nebula, I'll call it, and it looked like space. It looked like I was in space, like there's just distant lights, like stars or whatever, and there's people standing there, and they were very grayish, and couples. Some of them further away were in very old-time clothes, like I could see the hats and everything they were wearing, like a woman would wear a lady's hat and a man had like a regular. I didn't know what these things were. I was 8. And the one standing closest to me was very tall, and I looked up and I said, "Who are you?" And he says, "I'm your Uncle Georgie." And I said, "I don't have an Uncle Georgie." He says, "Yes, you do." And then he said, "You have to go back, Jason." And I said, "Okay, where am I?"
Right.
And he said, "Don't worry about it. You just have to go back." I came back. Boy, did my chest hurt. And I remember the pain in my chest. It felt like I got punched by a wrestler. And later I told my mother about it. I said, "Who's Georgie? Who's my Uncle Georgie?" And she's like, "Well, that's my brother. He died in 1967 or 71, I can't remember, before I was born." And I said, "Oh, well, I saw him in that dream thing I had." and she's like, "No, you must have saw a picture of him or heard me talking about him, or whatever." I had ADHD TV. I could have cared less what my parents talked about back then. I was into toys, cartoons, like I wasn't paying attention. So I clearly remember. I remember this right now, vivid. I've drawn it out recent years.
Does that mean at one point when that was happening, you actually had a choice whether to go forward?
I don't remember having a choice. I do not remember having a choice, but I got to see.
That's why he stood there and said, "Go back," because you could have went forward.
No, I don't remember ever having a choice. It was just he was standing there, like I guess he's the closest relative to greet me on the other side, or whatever you want to call it. I guess I don't know. I don't know anything as a fact, but he was the most recently deceased of my family, so he was right there. And then there were some others, maybe 10 feet away from that perspective of feet. But I could see probably as far back, it looked like maybe 100 feet, 200 feet away, different groups of people on the left and on the right. Almost like the father's side and the mother's side.
Right,
on the left side of the light and the right side of the light, all along this nebula tunnel.
Can you recall any of those faces at all?
Not the faces, no, because it was kind of like gray scale. I don't want to say there was like color, but it was more of a gray scale, and they did have clothes on. Definitely had clothes that were out of date, which I came to learn later in life as I understood how clothing trends changed over decades and centuries. I didn't know back then. Back then was the 70s, plaid was the thing. I didn't know. But that was my experience, and I never met the guy. So he introduced himself to me. So I actually did meet him. And And my mother showed me a picture of him, and I said, "That's him." That was the other thing. That was the other aspect of it. She showed me a picture, and I said, "Yes, that's him." Oh, I must have showed you this picture. My mother, she wouldn't believe anything. Like the president had to come himself and sign a document, and then my mother would say maybe. Like that's how much of a skeptic she was over everything. Like, so, which was good in a way because I didn't get the vaccines they wanted me to get. But she didn't believe me. She didn't believe anything. She just, nah, I don't believe it. Like that's how she was. So, but I was convinced. But you know, when you don't have parental support behind you, when you say something, then you kind of doubt yourself. You're like,
Right.
maybe I don't know. Maybe I did. You know, and I always had that self doubt because she never like nourished my my testimonies about anything. It's just like I'm a kid or I'm stupid or whatever. But it was very real, like to me, very, very real. And I can't prove it, but I can only coincide my testimony with others and of their, you know, experiences with the other side or near-death experiences and see if it coincides with it, and then we may have something. So that's the best I could do, testimony.
I think at the very least it shows that there is much more to this life than the realm we're in right now. And that's pretty much the topic today, is about atheists, you know, about what turns a person from atheism, because atheism is naturalism, and you know, I'm not saying they're the same thing, but they go hand in hand, where all that is what's physical and observable. And yet these experiences are very real, and they're not figments of our imagination, as you guys have both given, you know, accounts of your own experiences where there are confirmations from outside of you. And the timing and everything else is, if nothing else, it doesn't answer all our questions about, you know, what was that really? Was it a vision? Were these people actually there? We don't know. We can't prove it either way. But what we can say is that it isn't just our imagination. It is proof, if there's any proof at all, of life beyond this one, and that this life matters for some reason. How we live it will determine, you know, what kind of environment we'll be in the next life. So I think it has value from that. I need some break time. I don't know if you guys want to go on, or, you know, and talk for a little bit, but it's getting near supper time and all that here. So I need more than just a few-minute break.
Go ahead and do what you gotta do.
So you want me to shut it down, or you guys want to just keep it going, or what?
Keep it going. If we stop, we'll kick you off.
Okay. Well, I may be back in a little bit. I just have to take care of a few things, see what's going on, and whether I'm having to make supper or people heat something up. So I'll be back in a little bit. Be good. I know it's a lot to ask, but you know.
Never.
All right. I'll be back.
Jibby, did she just leave us in control?
All right, how can we ruin it?
That's what I'm looking right now. Hold on, give me a second.
Let me find those devil horn emojis.
Right.
So yeah, anybody in the chat got a near-death experience or spoke to the other side? My aunt, very close relationship with her husband, my mother's sister, and when her husband died, my uncle, she told me when I was like 16 or 17 that he came to see her. It was, I think, within a couple days of his passing or something, or within that first week. She said he came, he spoke to her, he said not to worry, everything was fine, heaven was beautiful, you know, don't worry about him, everything will be fine, that sort of thing. Very soothing message. And I'm sitting there listening to it, like as a teenager, dressed in black, with the Necronomicon in my car. I was into black magic and stuff back then, the dark side days. But I'm like, I'm listening to her, and I'm like, so how do you know that you didn't imagine it or whatever? And she's like, you'll just know someday. You'll just know. And I'm like, everybody keeps telling me that, but like, I don't know. I'll just know. Okay. It's not very reassuring or comforting, but she was 1000% convinced it was him who came and talked to her.
The day I realized there was God was when my son was born. When I saw that, and I put the link of me, it's mine, it's my wife's, it's God's, that's the day things changed. You don't have that yet, do you?
What?
Ever had a child of your own?
None that.
That's what I mean, just of your own.
Let's just put it this way. I'm the last survivor of my family.
Okay. Yeah, so
I've lost everything you can possibly lose in this
I
life
haven't
except
seen
the home.
that yet. And when that happens, that changes you. That's the one that nothing else changed me. That's the one that changed me. I was in your shoes pretty much until that happened. I'm not saying I'm not in your shoes. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying from the point of view of not knowing or having that known feeling that you're looking for, that's when I found it.
Yeah, every death in your family changes you too.
Yes.
You know, a sibling changes you forever when you lose that. Parent changes you forever. Grandparent changes you forever. Losing a kid changes you forever. When you have that all within like a 5-6 year time span, it's kind of like nervous system, maximum voltage, 12 watts. All right, anybody got 1,000 watts? We can run through this. Yeah, all right.
You're right.
Yeah, I don't have a nervous system anymore. It's gone. Oh, and while that was going on, I had the UFOs going on. I had, when it rained, no, it didn't rain, it poured. No, the firmament opened.
Yeah, exactly.
The firmament opened on me. That's the kind of when it rains on me. And I had a bad run there, where I was ready to just buy an 18-wheeler cab, dig a hole in the ground, and live in there, and just be done. Like,
yeah, you get to a point when you don't know why things can happen so bad. You don't understand it.
And I had spent 10, 15 years prior working with people, working with disabled people, working with orphan kids. I wasn't like in the mall. I had mall jobs, but I mean, I wasn't doing anything like for the money, you know, like the work I was doing, I could barely pay my bills, but it was good work. I thought, you know, it was doing something good for somebody. And no good deed goes unpunished in my family. So,
I'm back for a little bit. Teal was just asking, she's got a lot of people who wanted to see her talk about atheism and all, and she's kind of wondering if maybe we could have a different hangout for the rest of the discussion.
Okay. Yeah, because it'll only go back 2 hours, so it has to render, and that could take about a half hour or so if it doesn't go the full 8 hours.
Yeah, see, I don't have DVD enabled, so it's going to be a little while before it's available.
Well, no, it shouldn't be that long. It's only, you got a 4 hour one here?
Yeah.
A half hour or so, it should be up.
Yeah, so I just thought, well, that's no biggie. We can start another one later if we want, and people will find us somewhere if they want to continue. Yeah, but I was very happy you guys came along and
do a hangout sometime on afterlife stories.
Yeah, near-death experiences or whatnot. Yeah, that's an interesting.
Because everybody might have something to contribute to that, you know.
Yep, any kind of otherworldly experiences would be interesting to talk about.
No, that's a whole other one.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyway, I think I will, if everybody's okay with that, shut this down and let it render, and then we can pick it up another time.
Sure.
All righty. Thanks, everybody, for coming. Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody, thanks for coming. We didn't get too many at a time as far as Google tells us, but what does that mean? But anyway, it will render in a while, and catch y'all later. Let me find that red button that stops. There we go.